you kept standing there. And so your whole body, with all these different, sit on a box, sit on the bed, go for a book. We do the most...
Respect for Acting by Uta Hagen with Haskel, Frankel, abridged, read by Vincent Bagnall.
No, you're not lost in space. You are uncomfortable.
To Herbert, who revealed and clarified, and has always set me a soaring example.
What are you doing when you're confused?
Part 1, The Actor, Introduction. We all have passionate beliefs and opinions about the art of acting. My own are new only insofar as they have crystallized for me. I've spent most of my life in the theater and know that the learning process in art is never over. The possibilities for growth are limitless. I used to accept opinions such as, "Oh, you're just born to be an actor. Actors don't really know what they're doing on stage. Acting is just instinct. It can't be taught." During the short period when I, too, believed such statements, like anyone else who thinks that way, I had no respect for acting. Many people, including some working actors, who express such beliefs may admire the fact that an actor has a trained voice and body, but they believe that any further training can come only from actually performing before an audience. I find this akin to the sink-or-swim method of introducing a child to water. Children do drown, and not all actors develop by mere physical presence on a stage. A talented young pianist, skillful at improvisation or playing by ear, might be a temporary sensation in a nightclub or on television, but he knows better than to attempt a Beethoven piano concerto. The pianist's fingers just won't make it. A pop singer with an untrained voice may have a similar success, but not with a Bach cantata. The singer would rip his vocal cords. An untrained dancer has no hope of performing in Giselle. The dancer would tear tendons. In their attempt, they will also ruin the concerto, the cantata, and Giselle for themselves, because if they eventually are ready, they will only remember their early mistakes. But a young actor will unthinkingly plunge into Hamlet if he has the chance. He must learn that until he's ready, he is doing the same destructive thing to himself and the role. More than in the other performing arts, the lack of respect for acting seems to spring from the fact that every layman considers himself a valid critic. While no lay audience discusses the bowing arm or stroke of the violinist or the palette or brush technique of the painter, they will all be willing to give formulas to the actor. The aunts and agents of the actor drop in backstage and offer advice. "I think you didn't cry enough. I think your Camille should use more rogue. Don't you think you should gasp a little more?" And the actor listens to them, compounding the felonious notion that no craft or skill or art is needed in acting. A few geniuses have made their way in this sink-or-swim world, but they were geniuses. They intuitively found a way of work which they themselves were possibly at a loss to define. But even though we can't all be so endowed, we can develop a higher level of performing than the one which has resulted from the hit-or-miss customs of the past. Laurette Taylor became a kind of ideal for me when I saw her play Mrs. Midget in Outward Bound. Her work seemed to defy analysis. I went to see her again and again as Mrs. Midget, and later as Amanda in The Glass Menagerie. Each time I went to study and to learn, and each time I felt I had learned nothing, because she simply caught me up in her spontaneity to the point of eliminating my own objectivity. Years later, I was excited to read the biography Laurette by her daughter Marguerite Courtney, and to learn that already at the turn of the century her mother had found a way of breaking down her roles in a way which closely paralleled the principles in which I had come to believe. Laurette Taylor began her work by constructing the background of the character she was going to play. She worked for identification with this background until she believed herself to be the character, in the given circumstances, with the given relationships. Her work didn't stop until, in her own words, she was wearing the pants of the character. She spent rehearsals in exploring place, watching the other actors like a hawk, allowing relationships to grow, considering all possibilities for her behavior. She refused to memorize her lines until they were an integral part of her stage life. She refused to deliver fast results. She revolted against stage convention and imitation. And after all of this, she still insisted she had no technique or method of work. It is said that the Lunts reject method acting, and yet I had an experience with them that went beyond the method of most method actors. In the last act of Chekhov's The Seagull, during the big scene between Nina and Constantine, the rest of the household is supposed to be eating supper in the adjoining room. Mr. Lunt and Miss Fontaine worked tirelessly on this offstage supper scene, improvising dialogue, deciding what food they would be eating, searching for their behaviour during this meal. In performance, when the Lunts left the stage, they actually sat down at a dinner table in the wings, ate food, chatted, and re-entered with the reality of having had a meal. No one in the audience caught a glimpse of it, but they did get the clink of china and glass and silverware and the muted offstage dialogue as a brilliant counterpoint to the tragic onstage life. And the actors got a continuity of their existence. Paul Muni also denied a method of work in developing a character, yet in actual practice he sometimes went to live for weeks at a time in a neighborhood where his character might have lived or been born. Mr. Muni went through a process of research and work which was so deep, so subjective, that it was sometimes torturous to watch. We may forget that Stanislavski went to the finest actors of his day and observed them and questioned them about their approach to their work. And from these findings, he built his precepts. He didn't invent them. One of the finest lessons I ever learned was from the great German actor Albert Bassermann. I worked with him as Hilda in The Master Builder by Ibsen. He was already past 80, but was as modern in his conception of the role of soulness and his techniques as anyone I've ever seen or played with. In rehearsals, he felt his way with the new cast. The role had been in his repertoire for almost 40 years. He watched us, listened to us, adjusted to us. Meanwhile, executing his actions with only a small part of his playing energy. At the first dress rehearsal, he started to play fully. There was such a vibrant reality to the rhythm of his speech and behavior that I was swept away by it. I kept waiting for him to come to an end with his intentions so that I could take my turn. As a result, I either made a big hole in the dialogue or desperately cut in on him in order to avoid another hole. I was expecting the usual, "It's your turn, then it's my turn." At the end of the first act, I went to his dressing room and said, "Mr. Bassermann, I can't apologize enough, but I never know when you're through." He looked at me in amazement and said, "I'm never through, and neither should you be." The influences on my development, aside from the master artists I observed or worked with, have been numerous. In my parents' home, creative instincts and expression were considered worthy and noble. Talent went along with the responsibility to it. I was taught that concentrated work was a thing of joy in itself. Both my parents lived such a life and set this example for me, and they also showed me that a love of work is not dependent on outward success. I am grateful to Eva Lagelienne for first believing in my talent, for putting me on the professional stage, for upholding a reverence for the theater, for helping me to believe that the theater should contribute to the spiritual life of a nation. I'm grateful to the Lunts for endowing me with a rigorous theater discipline which is still in the marrow of my bones. I had a strange transition from amateur to professional. The word amateur in its origin was a lover or someone pursuing something for love. Now it is synonymous with a dilettante, an unskilled performer, or someone pursuing a hobby or pastime. When I was very young, and then when still young, I was employed in the theater. I was an amateur in its original sense. I pursued my work for love. Then the fact that I was paid was incidental to the love. At best, being paid meant that I was taken seriously in this love of my work. Undoubtedly, I was unskilled. My strength as an actor rested in the unshakable faith I had in make-believe. I made myself believe the characters I was allowed to play and the circumstances of the characters' lives in the events of the play. Inevitably, in the learning and turning process from amateur to professional, I lost some of the love and found my way by adopting the methods and attitudes of the pro. I learned what I now call tricks and was even proud of myself. I soon learned that if I made my last exit as Nina in The Seagull with full attention on the whys and wherefores of my leave-taking, with no attention to the effect on the audience, there were tears and a hush in the auditorium. If, however, I threw back my head bravely just as I got to the door, I received a round of applause. I settled for the trick which brought the applause. I could list pages of examples of acquiring clean entrance techniques, manufactured tears and laughter, lyric qualities, etc., all the things to do for calculated outer effects. I thought of myself as a genuine professional who had nothing more to learn, just other parts to make effective. I began to dislike acting. Going to work at the theater became a chore and a routine way of collecting my money and my reviews. I had lost the love of make-believe. I had lost the faith in the character and the world the character lived in. In 1947, I worked in a play under the direction of Harold Clurman. He opened a new world in the professional theater for me. He took away my tricks. He imposed no line readings, no gestures, no positions on the actors. At first I floundered badly, because for many years I had become accustomed to using specific outer directions as the material from which to construct the mask for my character, the mask behind which I would hide throughout the performance. Mr. Clurman refused to accept a mask. He demanded me in the role. My love of acting was slowly reawakened as I began to deal with a strange new technique of evolving in the character. I was not allowed to begin with or concern myself at any time with a preconceived form. I was assured that a form would result from the work we were doing. During the performance of the play, I discovered a new relationship to the audience which was so close, so intimate, that I thanked Harold Clurman for breaking down the wall which had so often separated me from the audience. I went on to explore more deeply with Herbert Berghoff what I had begun to learn from Harold. Herbert gave me painstaking help in how to develop and make use of these discoveries, how to find a true technique of acting, and how to make a character flow through me. The American theater poses endless problems for any actor who wants to call himself an artist, who wants to be part of an art form. From the very beginnings of doing the rounds of agents, producers, and directors, through the terrifying audition procedures, to the agonies of attempting to prove yourself, in early rehearsals, to the sense of compromise you feel in yourself, your fellow actors, the playwright, from the first rehearsal through the out-of-town tryouts to the opening night in New York, to the acceptance of the public and the critics, to the element of speculating about whether you will close on Saturday or work for years, or possibly never work again. These things make for conditions which periodically have disillusioned me about the Broadway theater, about my own work, about directors, about playwrights, about management, about every phase of my own chosen profession. The only place where I have known a degree of fulfillment is at the HB studio, where I am both teacher and learn from others. I am lucky to have found this place where I can put a degree of my struggle for growth, my search for the miracle of reality and acting, into practice. The HB studio was founded by my husband, Herbert Berghoff. We both teach there. We act there with our students and other fellow actors. We direct there. We work on plays and scenes which the commercial theater cannot afford or will not foster. As a teacher, in view of the pages that follow, I am not an authority on behaviorism or semantics, not a scholar, a philosopher, nor a psychiatrist, and I am frankly fearful of those who profess to teach acting while plunging into areas of actors' lives that do not belong on a stage or in a classroom. I teach acting as I approach it, from the human and technical problems which I have experienced through living and practice. I believe in my work and in what we are doing at the HB studio. I pray that with patience and foresight, a first-rate acting company will develop out of the studio, a company guided by first-rate young directors and hopefully young playwrights. When this happens, it will be a company of people who have grown together, who are united by common aims and by a way of work which has a common language and results in a homogeneous form of expression. The 4 walls to house such a group will follow, and then perhaps we will be able to make a real contribution to the American theater. But should it never happen, it will still be a goal worth working for.
If I say I'm waiting for a subway, or I'm waiting for somebody to meet me in a park, right? Nobody stands and waits for a subway. Now, where's the subway coming from? What do you do while you're standing there?
Chapter 1. Concept. If you have the opportunity to visit the Museum of Modern Art in New York City when they are showing the film series Great Actresses, you will see performances by Sarah Bernhardt and Eleonora Duse, among others. Both actresses lived and acted at the same time. Both were considered great, yet their approach to acting differed. Sarah Bernhardt was a flamboyant, external, formalistic actress, reflecting the fashion of her time. Duse was a human being on stage. Today, Bernhardt's mannerisms make you laugh. Duse moves you. She is more modern than tomorrow. I mention these 2 ladies from the past in a book meant for the actor of today because they represent 2 approaches to acting that have been debated in the theater through the centuries. The 2 approaches have names that annoy and confuse me. But since you will hear them again and again, let me name them now and hopefully get rid of them. One is the representational, Bernhardt. The other, the presentational, Duse. The representational actor deliberately chooses to imitate or illustrate the character's behavior. The presentational actor attempts to reveal human behavior through a use of himself, through an understanding of himself, and consequently an understanding of the character he's portraying. The representational actor finds a form based on an objective result for the character, which he then carefully watches as he executes it. The presentational actor trusts that a form will result from identification with the character and the discovery of his character's actions, and works on stage for a moment-to-moment subjective experience. For an example of the above, let me again refer to Bernhardt and Duse. Each, in her native tongue, had played the same popular melodrama of the time, the high point of which was the moment when the wife, accused of infidelity by her husband, swore her virtue. Je jure, je jure, je jure. Bernhardt proclaimed in a rising vibrato of passion. Her audience stood to scream and shout its admiration. Duse swore her virtue softly and only twice. She never spoke the 3rd oath, but placed her hand on her young son's head as she looked directly at her husband. Duse's audience wept. One night, after having received accolades for his performance from the audience, the 19th century French actor Coquelin called his fellow actors together backstage and said, "I cried real tears on stage tonight. I apologize. It will never happen again." His approach to acting was obviously representational. For him, a genuine experience on stage was rejected in the belief that it would muddy or blur the acting. I believe that the illustration of a character's behavior at the cost of removing one's own psyche, no matter how brilliant the performance that results, creates an alienation between audience and actor. The audience may yell, "Bravo!" They may even rise to their feet and cheer, but they are reacting in the same manner they would to an acrobat or a high-wire performer. They are cheering the visible skill. They are applauding the feat pulled off, but the vital empathy with human behavior, the emotional involvement between actor and audience, will be lacking. Formalized external acting, representational, has a strong tendency to follow fashion. Internal acting, presentational, rejects fashion and consequently can become as timeless as human experience itself. I think you know where I stand. Certainly it is with the Deuce, who, once accused of being too much alike in each of her roles, answered that as an artist the only thing she had to offer was the revelation of her soul. But if I stand with Deuce, and with the presentational approach to acting, I do not reject it in toto, the representational. To do so would be to reject actors of brilliance who have found their way along that path. I reject the representational only for myself. As actress and teacher, I must work on an approach to the theater that functions for me. As a teacher, I can teach only what I believe. For a would-be actor, the prerequisite is talent. You can only hope to God you've got it. Talent is an amalgam of high sensitivity, easy vulnerability, high sensory equipment, seeing, hearing, touching, smelling, tasting intensely, a vivid imagination, as well as a grip on reality, the desire to communicate one's own experience and sensations, to make one's self heard and seen. Talent alone is not enough. Character and ethics, a point of view about the world in which you live, and an education can and must be acquired and developed. Ideally, the young actor should possess or seek a thorough education in history, literature, English linguistics. Foreign languages are so much gravy, as well as all of the other art forms, music, painting, and dance, plus theater history and orientation. Essential to a serious actor is the training and perfecting of the outer instrument, comprising his body, his voice, and his speech. This instrument is the violin on which he will play. He should be aware that it can be comparable to a Stradivarius, and that he must turn it into and treat it like one. Since voice, speech, and body work are not in my realm as a teacher, I must simply assume that any actor serious enough to read this text will never cease to develop his physical capacities through dancing, fencing, gymnastics, etc., or work for the mastery of voice production and correct standard speech. All parts of his instrument should be limber enough to respond to the psychological and emotional demands he may make on it when he springs into physical and verbal action in the character in the play. A young actor who fails as Romeo, no matter how brilliant his inner technique, because he hasn't been able to shed his Brooklyn speech or his pigeon-toed walk, has only his own laziness to blame. Physical beauty is not a prerequisite to becoming an actor. Few of our present-day stars are physically beautiful in the conventional sense. However, the best of them, men and women, can create beauty for an audience. If you think of a beautiful baby, you may remember that it graciously accepts the admiration which comes to it voluntarily. The homely baby must reach out to others and quickly learns from necessity to clown and to do 100 things to win attention. The homely baby learns what the actor must learn to say through his art. Here I am. Look at me. The physically beautiful actor is often cursed with the passivity of easy conquest. He accepts and expects everyone to come to him, instead of reaching out to them. Mental brilliance is not essential. An intellectual actor can intellectualize himself out of real acting impulses, while his less mentally endowed brother, provided he is not dull and insensitive, may function magnificently if he has understanding of human behavior. By this I do not mean to imply that if you are highly intelligent or exquisitely beautiful, you don't stand a chance in the theater. It is necessary to have a point of view about the world which surrounds you, the society in which you live, a point of view as to how your art can reflect your judgment. To rebel or revolt against the status quo is in the very nature of an artist. A point of view can result from the desire to change the social scene, the family scene, the political life, the state of the ecology, the conditions of the theater itself. Rebellion or revolt does not necessarily find its expression in violence. A gentle lyric stroke may be just as powerful a means of expression. To portray things the way they are, To hold up a mirror to the society can also be a statement of rebellion. You must ask yourself, how can I bring all of this to the statement I wish to make in the theater? When you have decided what it is you wish to express, you must decide what kind of a theater you would ideally want to be a part of. And now your real problems begin. Many other fields of artistic endeavor offer the choice of working as an artist or as a commercial craftsman. As it stands now, our theater is by its very setup commercial. The finest and deepest play on Broadway has been produced to make money, not just to serve, enlighten, or enrich the lives of those fortunate enough to afford the price of a ticket. If the play does serve, that's so much velvet and extremely rare. If you have decided to become a commercial actor, an honorable profession to which I attach no stigma, you will have endless practical problems in the theater, television, and films. But if you want to be a serious theater artist, these problems will be multiplied endlessly by emotional frustrations, guilts, and longings. In the late 1950s, Jean-Louis Barrault complained about the theater in France. He said that it was too much like Broadway, and that the theaters were becoming like garages. At first I thought he meant dirty and overcrowded. Then I realized he meant the theaters were simply being hired as space to park in for a while instead of representing your theater, your home, with its own identity, where all of the productions should express your point of view about the world in which you live, in which you could even reveal your soul, dus, through art. Barrault had a romantic, liberal, slightly mystical point of view in his own theater, which manifested itself in his choice of plays and his conception for presentation, as opposed to, let's say, the socialist, political Théâtre National Populaire of Jean Villard and Gérard Philippe, or the traditional academic approach of the Comédie Française. All three subsidized theaters played simultaneously in Paris for many years, along with other groups who had their own points of view. Sometimes more than one theater produced the same play at the same time, but each with its own distinct viewpoint. Barrault feared that these individualistic theaters were threatened by the commercial circumstances encroaching on the Parisian theatrical scene. In America, we don't even know what Barrault feared. Our theater with a point of view isn't threatened, because it has never existed, except in the minds of individual artists. Consequently, we have no true theater-going tradition. The theater is still not a part of our lives, not a necessity, not a sustenance for our spiritual lives. We actors have never had a home, as Barrault understood it. West Germany has over 275 subsidized repertory theaters, and West Germany is smaller than the state of Wisconsin. Its theaters are subsidized by the state, the municipality, industry, and labor. The people expect this subsidy. They revere and honor the artist who serves in the theater for a living wage, but not huge amounts of money. In America, our audiences, friends, families, and neighbors, think we are no good if we work for less than fortunes. Yet surely the compensation of respect is far greater than money. In the United States, we have had a number of theaters with a point of view that almost made it, or they made it for several years. Many years ago, we had the Provincetown Players, the early Theater Guild, the Civic Repertory, and the Group Theater. Since then, each decade has brought us further attempts in the establishment of meaningful and permanent companies. I'm sure you're familiar with many of them. The eventual failure of these noble ventures has almost been connected with the success of one or more individuals who scored and then left to go on to a personal success in a film or commercial play. The venture that had served them was left behind, just a launching pad to be abandoned by those who had used it to reach personal heights. The potential of these theaters was devoured by the commercial theater. Countless other ventures have wondered why they failed to acquire their own audiences. Their purpose is often simply to do good plays. Usually they present these good plays without any point of view reflecting the problems of the day. They should stop wondering and make their own statement. They will find their audience. To maintain one's ideals in ignorance is easy. To maintain them with the full realization of the existing circumstances is not. To accept the way it is the opportunistic way, or the way of the ostrich. To attempt to battle it takes knowledge and character. I've often heard both professional working actors and young beginners proclaim with passion, "I want to be the best actor in America." But what is that? Merely a statement of a competitive goal? It epitomizes the American dream of ambition for success, accompanied by fame and fortune as proof of worth. Steak, chicken, lobster, lamb are all delicious, but which is best? One may be the favorite of a certain group, but others have a different preference. Who is best among Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven? These three musical giants worked and created in Vienna at the same time. We may prefer the music of one composer to that of another, but there is no best. Each worked to create his own best, not to be the best. A prominent actress once said to me, "I get so confused. Who am I trying to reach? The gas station attendant or Brooks Atkinson?" She didn't understand that they both have needs for an offering, for sustenance. I explained to her that I was confused for a while when I got rave reviews in the Seagull. They went straight to my head and stayed there until I attended a matinee of another young actress who had received equally good reviews. In my judgment, her performance was poor. I was forced to reevaluate my thinking. If I dismissed the critical raves for one actress, what value could I place on my own? Who ultimately, outside myself and a few of my peers whose opinion I valued, was to be the judge of my work? I began to learn to work for standards designed neither for the gas station attendant nor Brooks Atkinson, but for my own. Set your own goals. Set them for your own approval and those of your colleagues whom you truly respect. By the very nature of our profession, we seem to develop slothful rather than disciplined habits. A great dancer to his last days cannot and will not perform without hours of daily practice. The pianist Arthur Rubinstein and the violinist Isaac Stern cannot and will not play a concert without daily practice. While an actor may be forced to work as a waiter or a typist to sustain himself while waiting for the call to play King Lear, there is no excuse for his frittering away the hours that belong to him and his true work with partying and fun and games. Every actor must demand total discipline of himself if he really means to be an actor. It can be acquired if it's not already in his bones. A very gifted actor may be surpassed and outrun by a lesser talent, simply because he's lazy, buck-passing, superficial, an actor settling for the easiest choices. The less talented actor can win with a thorough, back-breaking discipline in his work, in his examination of his materials, and his relationship to it, in the dedication, that much abused word, to his work. Let me say something about ethics in the theater. Another reason for the collapse of well-intentioned venture after venture is sloth and egomania. We must accept that the theater is a communal adventure. Unlike the soloist, we can't perform alone in the theater. Only Ruth Draper, the monologuist, was able to do that. The better the play, the more we need an ensemble venture. We must recognize that we need each other's strengths, and the more we need each other's professional comradeship, the better the chance we have of making theater. We must serve the play by serving each other. An egomaniacal star attitude is only self-serving and hurts everyone, including the star. We must aim for character in the moral and ethical sense of the word, compounded of the virtues of mutual respect, courtesy, kindness, generosity, trust, attention to the others, seriousness, loyalty, as well as those necessary attributes of diligence and dedication. Often a young actor reads that John Barrymore or Laurette Taylor was a heavy drinker and decides that this is what made them successful and so begins boozing it up. Or he may cloak himself in the exhibitionism of another star, or the vanity of still another, thinking that these detrimental traits are the key to success. I believe that personal vanity is a disease, like alcoholism or a cancer, which can eat up the initial talent and sensitivity and capacity of an individual actor. Self-glorification and narcissism block the spontaneous behavior, the genuine give and take of any actor. Guard against it the way you would any other destructive disease. Unfortunately, our theater has few examples on which an aspiring actor can pattern himself. Most of them seem to show us that the actor who serves himself in the play can succeed. This must make and has made for chaos in the American theater as a whole. If we want a theater to be respected in America, a theater which is needed, we must each make ourselves personally responsible, far more than in a country where the actor already has a home. Now we are migrant workers, fruit pickers, working where we are momentarily wanted and being exploited and then moving on. We have many of the same emotional and character problems of other migrant workers. Stanislavski's statement is always with me. Love the art in yourself, not yourself in the art. I vividly remember a conversation years ago involving the brilliant French actor Gérard Philippe and some American actors, myself included. We were all envious of his position in the Théâtre National Populaire, envious of his being in a position to choose the kind of theater with which he wanted to align himself, the permanence of that theater, and what it represented to the nation as a whole. One actor screamed in frustration, "We can't have that kind of theater in America." Philippe answered quietly, "That is your fault." I knew he was correct, but it has taken me many years to define in which way. Actors are as responsible as any other group in the theater for its present state. We continuously mouth our objections and our revolt against the status quo individually, but we feed the status quo collectively. If we realize our individual responsibilities to an art form, we must not only live up to it as individuals, but remember the collective form of this art, and that more than anything else, it is one for all and all for one. I have referred to specific examples of European theaters and European artists in order to avoid direct criticism of the home scene. Despite evidence to the contrary, I refuse to believe that the American theater, in all of its branches, Broadway, off-Broadway, repertory companies, regional theater, is incapable of change, revolt, or a development into true service to its public.
How do you make yourself comfortable in relationship to what you're wearing? Who do you see? When you plan what you're going to say to your agent, what do you do?
Chapter 2, Identity. If we are now in agreement and have taken sides with the actor who presents rather than represents, if we understand the necessity for developing an organic inner technique as well as our outer instrument, if we are convinced that a deep sense of ethics, a development of our best character elements is essential for us to become fine artists who can serve and enlighten an audience about the human experience, then the question can be asked, where do we begin? First, you must learn to know who you are. You must find your own sense of identity, enlarge this sense of self, and learn to see how that knowledge can be put to use in the characters you will portray on stage. I assume that most of you are at this point theoretically on my side, even though through your previous training and experience as both actor and audience, you are still caught up in the mistaken notion that you are a human being in the wings and an actor on stage. You have a tendency to copy what you have seen others do on stage, rather than search within your own life experience to bring forth a new human being on stage. Let us assume you are cast as Horatio in Hamlet. At the mere mention of the part, each of you already has a ready-made image based on other Horatios you have seen. I doubt that it is a Horatio who has ever eaten, slept, washed, or gone to the bathroom. This doesn't mean that your Horatio will necessarily do any of these things during the course of the play, but he should be considered as a human being, not as a rubber stamp copy of another actor. Think of all the classical plays that have been almost buried for contemporary audiences by bad traditional acting. Why should every lady-in-waiting move like a ballet dancer? Why should every spear carrier stand as rigid as cardboard? Why should the king and queen intone like bad opera singers without music? Where are the real human beings in these plays? They are lost behind ready-made, false forms. But if we accept that the reality of these characters is not arrived at through the memory of other performances or through cliché generalities, royalty is imperious, courtiers are graceful, jesters are comic, spear carriers are erect, we must also accept the converse, that realities often relied on by the supposedly modern actor, such as Brooklyn speech, head-scratching, belching, and blue jean postures, will not bring about a Horatio who is a close friend to a prince of Denmark who attended the University of Wittenberg centuries ago, who is accustomed to life at court, etc. Since we cannot find reality in either of these directions, we must admit that we have not learned enough about human beings or about ourselves as human beings to bring about a genuine life for these characters. We also seem to find cliché forms for contemporary characters. We shuffle and mumble and imitate the naturalistic actors of today who have made a success. We look for the ordinary rather than the extraordinary in our daily lives. And so the explorations of ourselves become smaller and of less importance as we go along. We pigeonhole and characterize our behavior until our very self-image becomes as much a cliché or stereotype as does our preconception of the characters we want to play. Our sense of reality is limited. We look at our daily lives for convenient, recognizable behaviorisms to transfer to the stage. Yet every day some incident occurs that causes us to say, "Wow! If you saw that on a stage, you wouldn't believe it." Or you yourself will do something unusual and also remark, "If I did that on stage, no one would believe it." And so we water down the truth to make our stage life natural, whatever that's supposed to mean, even as we admit that the two truck drivers, cutting in on each other and leaping to the street to have it out, are often more dramatic than Macduff besting Macbeth. My own self-image in a given situation, who I think I am, is not always what I really am. Consequently, the inner image of myself in that situation may differ from the outer image I present. I think I'm a child of nature, open, frank, impulsive, generous, compassionate, bursting with humor, tender, brilliant, and noble. This inner image is accompanied by an image of how I think I look. I see myself striding through the countryside, shiny with flying hair, wide-eyed and expectant. Yet if I walk down the street and inadvertently catch a glimpse of myself reflected in a store window, I am appalled at what I actually see. Obviously, if the inner and outer images we have of ourselves are each as one-sided as these, we will believe that we cannot find the necessary components of another character in ourselves. We will be convinced that we can only play characters who don't fit these images by illustrating them. The more an actor develops a full sense of his own identity, the more his scope and capacity for identification with other characters than his own will be made possible. If I compare myself to a large, meaty, round apple, I discover that my inner and outer cliché image of myself is only a wedge of it, possibly the wedge with the rosy cheek on the skin. But I have to become more aware of myself as the total apple, the firm inner flesh, as well as the brown rotten spot, the stem, the seeds, the core. All of the apple is me. The more I discover, the more I realize that I have endless sources within myself to put to use in the illumination of endless characters in dramatic literature, that I am compounded of endless human beings, depending on the events moving in on me. My surrounding circumstances, relationships with a variety of people, what I want, and what's in my way at a given moment, all within the context of my unique identity. You spontaneously play a variety of different roles in life. Imagine yourself attending a cocktail party given for producers, agents, directors, all in a position to employ you. How you feel, how you dress, how you behave will be a you that is different from the you who goes to a party of friends and colleagues in a loft where you sit guzzling wine and beer and munching on pretzels, or the you who attends a children's birthday party, or a party given by your parents for your friends. In each situation, your very idiom changes. Your self-image changes. Assume you are at your desk, writing a letter. The doorbell rings. Your self-image will change depending on whom you expect to be there. A fellow actor. Which particular one? An old friend from your hometown. The superintendent. The laundryman. A parent. Your agent. For each person, you will present a different you. Previous circumstances and existing circumstances will bring about a different you, whether you had a good night or a bad night, whether it is hot or cold, whether you are in a tidy or a messy state. Even something as elementary as the clothes you wear can make you feel and then behave old or young, a slob or elegant, awkward or in command, snobbish or humble. A confrontation with the same person, depending on your immediate desire, can make you stubborn or giving, vicious or kind, courageous or cowardly. We must learn to understand and accept the facets of ourselves which we don't wish to recognize: shyness, selfishness, greed, envy, panic, lack of control, stupidity, etc. And in admitting to them, enlarge our capacity for identification. Above all, we must become self-observant enough not only to recognize our needs and define our feelings, but to connect them to the behavior which ensues. If we get into a violent argument with a bus driver, we know how we felt, but we rarely know how we behaved. In an encounter with a lover, we can describe our feeling of tenderness in such obvious behavior as an embrace, but the small actions that surrounded it are forgotten. If I am to play a silly, fluffy creature, and I think, I am not such a person, I cannot use myself, I mistakenly believe I can only indicate what she would do. Yet if I watch myself greeting my dogs with gushes of baby talk and little giggles, I am silly. If I talk to a scientist, even to an electrician, I am stupid, though my cliché image tells me I am brilliant. If a drunken, bigoted doorman gives me a hard time, I appear snobbish, and I pull rank, though my self-image tells me I am a humanist, a liberal at all times. I think I am fearless, yet you should see me with a mouse. The continuing job of learning to find out who you really are, of learning to pinpoint your response responses, and even more important, the myriad consequent behaviorisms which result will help you begin to fill your warehouse with sources upon which to draw for the construction of a character, the new you selected for your character on stage. Many doubts continue to arise in both the young and older professional, as well as in the learning actor, for whom the concept of using himself primarily as the source for the stage character is relatively new. A prominent film actress, whom I was once helping with a role, was thrown by the fact that her part was just an ordinary American woman, like herself. Same age, background, schooling, emotional problems, etc. She felt she had nothing to act. Her previous orientation to acting consisted of finding a mask to hide behind. She believed that the outer dressing of the part, age difference, historic difference, national difference, contained the real essence of acting. For her, acting was only a craft when it was miles away from her. And when it was used to illustrate something totally different from herself, she knew so little of herself and her own behavior that she was unable to make any use of herself to strip to her soul. She had only one wish: to put on a mask, to disguise herself. To seem to want or need a mask behind which to bury one's self often comes not only from an incorrect concept, but from a distrust in ourselves. We harbor the suspicion that we ourselves are boring, and that only the character in the play is sufficiently interesting to hold an audience. I like to make the example of observing a live animal on stage. Even though the actors are in the midst of strong dramatic action, the audience will be riveted on a cat, sitting quietly in a chair, following a bit of blowing lint with its eyes. Now, a cat cannot be as fascinating as a human being, but the cat's sensory apparatus is more powerful than a human's, and it is more single-minded in its purpose, with no mental distractions to blur its instincts. The cat really exists with strong, spontaneous, forward-moving attention, and so it can surpass the actor who is predictably busy with his stage life. I refuse to let a cat win. I know I am more interesting, but I can learn from the cat to develop my sensory apparatus, and that I should aim for the same unanticipated involvement of the moment. Will I or won't I pounce? It sounds simple, but the art is that I can aim for that cat's spontaneity and execute it by design. What is boring is not the real you in action, but the mechanical execution of a task, whether it be over-dimensional or tiny. If I must use myself, won't I be the same in every part I play? The question calls to mind the personality actor who is really the same in every part he plays. Examples of this type clog the stage, screen, and television. Because they are always the same does not mean that they are truly using themselves. They are simply playing the identical few notes in themselves over and over again without a real search or selection from themselves. Often, after an initial success, these personality actors simply copy from themselves, imitating moments and effects which have worked for them before. They rely on a quality which they feel has worked with an audience, and end up playing the manner of themselves in as tiresome a way as another actor playing the quality of the character. One of the greatest compliments I ever received was from someone who had seen me in about 10 plays, in parts as different as St. Joan, Blanche, in A Streetcar Named Desire, Martha in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, and Natalia in Turgenev's A Month in the Country. He wanted to meet me because he couldn't figure out what I was really like. He thought I was so different in every part. And yet, while playing, after having discovered myself in the part, I always felt that it was me on stage in the given circumstances, not she. In an interview, Ingrid Bergman once stated that when she played The Visit, she was faced with a vengeful character whom she understood, but that vengeance was not a part of her own personality. That might be true and accurate in her private life, where she has learned to control it. But it's also true that any child has experienced a sense of vengeance, even expressed it against a parent or another toddler. That your need for vengeance may not have the consequent actions of the lady in The Visit is not important, but that you are aware that you have experienced the need for it is. Someone working on Laura in the Glass Menagerie will state flatly, "But I've never been shy." I have only to suggest a time when she may have been to a high school dance with a big pimple on her chin, and the memory will turn the unshy actress into a blushing wallflower. Your own identity and self-knowledge are the main sources for any character you may play. Most human emotions have been experienced by each of us by the time we are 18, just as they have been by all human beings throughout the ages. That you gain control and understanding of them as you get older, that they may ease or intensify, is self-evident. We do not have to get psychoanalytical or delve into Freud, Jung, Reich, or Adler to learn to understand ourselves and others to be healthy artists. We have to be truly curious about ourselves and others. Other questions which arise on the subject of our own limited sense of self and self-expression come from our social backgrounds, particularly middle-class America. In sections of the country, we are shaped by a society which is ashamed of spontaneous emotion. Don't cry. Don't laugh so loud. Don't hug me in public. Don't scream, etc. So, obviously, when we want a genuine emotional release on stage, we have a harder time uncovering it than someone who comes from a so-called lower class where spontaneous emotion is allowed a free rein. The sense of identification with history is almost nil in America because history and heritage are so little respected. The Mark Twain House in New York City is pulled down and replaced by a steakhouse because our opulent society can't seem to raise the $20,000 needed to maintain it as a museum. Something similar occurs in the nation every week. This lack of respect for the past and seeming worship for innovation is a detriment to the actor. Our imagination is not stimulated by our past, not even by nature or the very earth we walk on. But if we visit England, or any other European country for that matter, we start to identify with another century on the very cobblestones. It's hard to visit the Tower of London without becoming acutely aware that those strange lives in history books lived and breathed, still seem to, in every cell, corner, and courtyard. The actor's imagination is stimulated into identification with country and period. Historic distances fade. Seemingly fictional facts become a reality if one is as lucky as I was, at the age of 9, to spend a summer in a medieval castle on the Rhine. The fantasies I experienced amidst towers and turrets, a real moat and a drawbridge, dungeons, ramparts, the works, allowed me to believe that I had lived for a short while in the Middle Ages. If you can't go abroad or even visit places like Independence Hall in Philadelphia or Salem, Massachusetts, or other historic spots to find a variety of historical experiments, you can still read biographies and histories. Read them until you know you've lived in those rooms with those people, eaten that particular food, slept in that strange bed behind those curtains, danced, jousted, and tilted with the best of them. Read Walden, and you'll understand pollution. Customs, architecture, fashion, social needs, politics, all change, all come and go. But throughout history, people have breathed, slept, eaten, loved, hated, and had similar feelings, emotions, needs, anything which allows for a realization of this by the actor is vital. It must be grasped fully, so that if on stage you live now or at any other time in history, you will be able to put yourself there rather than be reduced to an illustration of doing what they did then. Lately, through biographies, I went to the block with Marie Antoinette in The Fatal Friendship. I was married to Kaiser Franz Josef in The Lonely Empress. I prepared myself for the block, dressing all in red, so the blood wouldn't show, as Mary, Queen of Scots, and I had all of Queen Victoria's endless children. I also built myself a cabin in Concord. Keep pace with the present. Take a trip to the moon. Envision the future. When you look at paintings, put yourself into them instead of looking at them. The normal procedure of identifying with observed events which we went through as children should not ever stop for the adult actor. When, as children, we visit sick persons and put ourselves into their bed, fantasize their agonies, are brave and enjoy their flowers, we are simply extending our own experiences imaginatively. If we peek into a tenement window and see a drunken father abusing wife and children, we put ourselves there to take abuse with courage. As an adult, don't con yourself out of these fantasies. Anything which strengthens your faith that it happened to you is of use. We must overcome the notion that we must be regular. Be like one of us. Don't put on airs. Don't get so fancy. It robs you of the chance to be extraordinary and leads you to the mediocre. This insistence on conformity, on being like everyone else, often prevents us, for instance, from potentially training something as practical as our speech. Our friends and relatives castigate us as our speech improves, and we try to lose dialects and regional speech hang-ups. What's the matter with you? You talk so stagey. When our need to express ourselves verbally, to truly communicate, goes beyond, cool, man, wow, out of sight, it's heavy, or whatever the current slang. We are accused of artificiality. But if we listen to our friends and relatives and stay regular when we approach plays of language, like Shakespeare, T.S. Eliot, Fry, Shaw, we find an unfamiliarity with the verse. And the idiom makes us feel affected. We must learn to balk at this social dictum in order to enlarge our imagination and our use of self. Remember that vowels and consonants spat out represent our wishes. There is a decided difference between the self-awareness that is vital to the theater artist and the self-consciousness that is ordinarily applied to the awkward or affected person. To become aware of usually subconscious and intuitive, spontaneous behavior in order to make use of it for creating a character in a play will not make you self-consciously affected or unreal, nor will it, as I have been asked, block intuitive or spontaneous behavior in our daily experiences. I am not a scientist, a psychologist, or a behaviorist, but I know this is true. If you are affected in your daily life, calculatingly self-aware in your relations with others, you will undoubtedly be a bad actor because your attention is narcissistic. If you have acquired these affectations in your teens and have not shaken them by the time you are 20, you are in trouble. After all, if you possess borrowed behavior in life and focus on it rather than on others, how can you be really active on stage? When I speak of copying or imitating what you have already seen, there is a point in the life of any young artist, in any art form, when someone he comes in contact with, whom he idolizes, influences him so strongly that the need to emulate is almost a reflex, almost a subconscious procedure. This is true of the most gifted artist, and I suppose one way in which the finger of genius touches the next generation. This passing on down of our gifts, which we have been given by those before us, is not to be belittled or minimized. We must pray that we are influenced by the best, but try to inherit the inner work and not the outer shape, the concept, not the form. We must pray that our intuitive taste and judgment will allow us to copy, however only temporarily, a master rather than just a momentary box office success. Mozart was influenced by Haydn, but Mozart went on to become Mozart. And I recognize him no matter what new musical invention he has made. Beethoven was influenced by Haydn and Mozart, but found his own expression. So I recognize him in quartet, mass, or symphony. Can't we aim for that as actors? Even as recreators? In finding and strengthening our own identity, can't we develop our capacity for identification to the point where we will be able to put it to service by revealing the human being in dramatic literature?
Now, one of your biggest problems with the scene is that it has no real physical life anywhere. There is standing, there is preconceived line readings, and emotion. There is no physical presence in this room.
Chapter 3, Substitution. The expression to lose yourself in the part or in the performance, which has so often been used by great artists in the theater, has always confused me. I find it much more stimulating to say that I want to find myself in the part. To oversimplify, these artists obviously meant that one should reject the desire to show off, that one should not wallow in one's own ego, that one should not trade on personal tricks. Instead, one should become involved with the performance without concern for its outer form, pyrotechnics or personal sale. Once we are on the track of self-discovery in terms of an enlargement of our sense of identity, and we now try to apply this knowledge to an identification with the character in the play, we must make this transference, this finding of the character within ourselves, through a continuing and overlapping series of substitutions from our own experiences and remembrances, through the use of imaginative extension of realities, and put them in the place of the fiction in the play. Webster defines substitution as the act of putting a person or thing in place of another, serving the same purpose. To take the place of. A young actress working on the part of Manuela in Children in Uniform was having difficulty with the moment when Fraulein von Bernberg, the teacher she loves and admires, confronts her with her torn chemise and says, "This will never do." Manuela must react with deep shame and humiliation. The actress could not make this moment meaningful. Neither the garment nor the actress playing the teacher seemed to matter enough to her. Accidentally, I supplied her with a stimulating substitution for the teacher. I said, "What if Lynn Fontaine had a pair of your soiled panties in her hand and showed them to you?" The actress turned beet red, snatched the chemise from her Fraulein von Bernberg, and hid it frantically behind her back. Many of you are familiar with substitution as it applies technically to an individual moment in a play when the given material fails to stimulate you sufficiently, and you must search for something which will trigger an emotional experience, as in the Manuela incident, and send you into the immediate action of the play. I use the word substitution in a much broader sense. In fact, I could even prove that substitution can be used in every moment of the actor's homework and throughout the rehearsal period for every stage of the work. Consequently, it can have its effect on every moment of the actor's life on stage. I use substitution in order to make believe in its literal sense, to make me believe the time, the place, what surrounds me, the conditioning forces, my new character, and my relationship to the other characters, in order to send me into the moment-to-moment spontaneous action of my newly selected self on stage. In putting myself into the circumstances of the play, a talented amateur, as well as a genius actor, often makes substitutions intuitively. If you ask me if it is necessary to make a substitution for something that is already real to you, my answer is no. If it is real, you have already made the substitution. You tell me you believed it was raining when you looked from your stage window into the wings. Obviously, you took a specific rain. There are numerous types of rain: drizzle, splashy, gentle, torrential, pelting, etc., that you have experienced in your life, and put it into the play at this moment. An actress told me that Blanche Dubois' young husband was very real to her when she described his death in Streetcar, and challenged the necessity of making a substitution for him. It was apparent that she had instinctively made one. Otherwise, he would have stayed a fiction on the page for her. At 18, when I played Nina in The Seagull with the Luntz, many elements of the part existed for me in life. Nina is a young, unsophisticated, middle-class girl from the country who is thrown in with a famous actress of whom she is in awe, and a famous man, a writer in the play, whom she hero worships. That was my relationship to the Luntz, so I was able to use them head-on. In Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, Martha is the daughter of a professor whom she adores. She lives in a college town as the play opens. She and her husband are returning from a faculty party. I am the daughter of a famous professor whom I adored. I was raised in a university town. I did attend many faculty parties. Consequently, those things were real to me and directly usable for that particular aspect of my work on the part. However, these moments where an actor's life and the playwright's created life mesh are rare, and so the process of substitution must be thoroughly understood, developed, and practiced, until it becomes an ingrained work habit. Every stage of the search for the part needs endless substitutions from life experience. This includes reading, trips to museums, art galleries, etc. Even bad films can be of service if the locale has authenticity for you to the point where you can believe you were there. No director can help you with your substitutions, since he has not been a part of your life experience. He will help you with the character elements he is after, dictate the place, the surroundings, the given circumstances, and define your relationship to the other characters in the play. But how you make these things real to yourself, how you make them exist, is totally private work. Let me illustrate some of the substitution areas and approximately how you must deal with them. Suppose I am to work on the part of Blanche Dubois in A Streetcar Named Desire. I have to hunt for an understanding of and an identification with the character's main needs. A need for perfection, and always when and how have I needed these things? A romantic need for beauty, a desire for gentleness, tenderness, delicacy, elegance, decorum, a need to be loved and protected, a strong sensual need, a need for delusion when things go wrong, etc. If I return to my cliché image of myself, the earthy, frank, gutsy child of nature, I'm in trouble, and there will be an enormous distance between Blanche and myself. If, on the other hand, I remember myself preparing for an evening at the opera, bathing and oiling and perfuming my body, soothing my skin, brushing my hair until it shines, artfully applying makeup until the little creases are hidden, and my eyes look larger and I feel younger, spending hours over a silky, elegant wardrobe, and a day over the meal I will serve before the opera, setting out my freshest linen, my best crystal and polished silver among dainty flowers. If I recall how I weep over a lovely poem by Rilke, or Donna, or Browning, how my flesh tingles when I hear Schubert chamber music, how tender I feel at a soft twilight, how I respond to someone pulling out a chair for me at the table, or opening a car door for me, or offering me their arm for a walk in the park. Then I am beginning to find within myself realities connected with Blanche Dubois' needs. I was not raised on an elegant plantation like Bellerive, nor have I lived in Laurel, Mississippi, but I have visited elegant mansions in the East. I have seen many photographs of Faulkner country and estates. I have toured some of the South, and from a conglomerate of these experiences, I can now make my Bellerive and start to build a reality from my life there, before the play's beginning. Unfortunately, I've never been in New Orleans, or the French Quarter, but I have read a great deal, seen many films and newsreels. I have even related the French Quarter of New Orleans in a way to a little section of the Left Bank in Paris, where I once lived, to make it real to myself. The Kowalski apartment itself, which is dictated for me by the playwright, the designer, and the director, must nevertheless be made real to me by substitutions from my own life. It is I who must make the sense of cramped space, the lack of privacy, the disorder and sleaziness, the empty beer cans and stale cigarette butts, the harsh street noises all move in on me chaotically and frighteningly. Each object or thing that I see or come in contact with must be made particular so that it will serve the new me and bring out the psychological and sensory experiences necessary to animate my actions. To find a reality for the fatigue, the heat, the oppression, I will have to examine my own life and senses in my relationship to Stella, Stanley, Mitch, their friends and neighbors, as well as to my young husband, my parents and relatives, and the traveling salesman, all of whom I talk about, but who do not appear in the play. I will have to do a back-breaking job if I am to bring them to a full reality for myself through substitutions and combinations of substitutions. I never had a sister, nor did I have a relationship with another girl which was psychologically identical to Blanche's with Stella. I may put together my relationship to a girl who felt like a younger sister, of whom I expected respect and attention, whom I enjoyed bossing and giving advice to, and whom I loved. With a relationship to a friend upon whom I felt dependent for love and comfort. I may even use a dozen elements from a dozen different relationships from my past and put them together to build this new relationship with my stage Stella, endowing her at different moments in the play with these borrowed qualities. I must follow an identical procedure with each of the other characters in the play. Let me emphasize that this process is in flux from the beginning of my homework until the rehearsals have ended. The example of Blanche was given to show you a variety of areas in which you must hunt for substitutions and to give further reasons for the necessity of your understanding this hunt. But there are many more aspects of the work not yet touched upon, which, when put together, should result in the action for the character, what the character will do. To do is a synonym for to act. At this point, we are nowhere near the acting. I am still in the process of building a sense of reality and faith in my character. When an actor has difficulty in finding a substitution for the content of a given scene as a whole, he can usually find the root of the problem in the fact that he's being too literal. Many actors take the outer event and the outer words at face value. For example, the character says, "I hate you," under circumstances where he is actually crying out for attention from someone he loves. But the actor works only for the hate. Faced with Othello's final scene with Desdemona, an actor may protest, "But how can I find a substitution when I've never had the desire to murder anyone?" Or the Desdemona may complain, "I know I should be terrified, but no one has ever threatened to kill me." In both instances, my answer would be, I hope not. But if at this late stage, in the events of the play, the actors have not acquired sufficient nourishment to supply a reality for their immediate state of being and consequent needs, they must search for the psychological springboard which will send them into the immediate events. They must hunt out the psychological objective of the scene, and for that they can find the substitution. If I am Desdemona in this scene, I should see that I want to cope with a foreboding of an unspecified disaster. I want to rid myself of a sense of mounting terror. As illogical as it may sound, I can use an experience of waiting in a hospital room prior to surgery, even a dentist's office prior to a tooth extraction. The fears that rush in on me are larger and less static than some fictional preconceived fear for a Desdemona. If you misunderstand me and again think too literally that during the performance, while lying in a bedroom in Cyprus, you should be imagining yourself in a dentist's office, you have skipped the inevitable step of taking this substituted psychological reality and transferring it to the existing circumstances and events in the play. Transferring the essence of the experience, not the original event, to the scene. Othello, in turn, should look for the psychological need for retribution, for having to fulfill a great obligation which tortures him and gives him pain. The actor is stopped over and over again by his sense of hunting for a similarity of events in the play and in his own life, rather than a similarity of psychological experiences. For example, the need to punish a child, which then should allow him to accept the events with faith. Relatively easier to understand and apply are those substitutions used to find a given moment or task in the events which seem insufficiently real, the previously mentioned scene between Menuela and Fraulein von Bernberg. Another kind of example occurred when I was working on the monologue of Mistress Page in The Merry Wives of Windsor. She has just received a love letter and gradually realizes it is from Sir John Falstaff, which outrages her. As I was isolating the monologue from the play for an exercise, I had no actor to endow with the necessary realities of my Falstaff. The cliché image of Falstaff, with his wide-brimmed hat, puffy red cheeks, mustaches turning upward, pointed beard and bushy eyebrows, and high ruff around his fat neck, didn't help me at all. Then I thought, what if I read this letter and discovered Sidney Greenstreet, or Jackie Gleason had written it to me? Suddenly the contents of the words in the letter moved in on me strongly. It made me laugh, outraged me, amazed me, etc. I had worked with Sidney and knew him personally and adored him. But even if I hadn't, my knowledge of his work in films might have stimulated me similarly, far more than the conventional image of a Falstaff. In The Country Girl, there is a point where Bernie Dodd calls Georgie Elgin a bitch. This should act on me as deeply wounding, insulting, and produce a shocked gasp. But the word itself does not mean much to me. I substituted another word. What if he called me a blank? That word does shock and wound me. I imagined that Bernie hurled that word at me, and it drove me up from my chair. In the same play, there was a moment when my husband, Frank Elgin, betrayed me with a lie, and I had to swallow it. My next given action was to take him to the sink in his dressing room and get him a glass of water. I was able to receive the betrayal correctly, but somehow it didn't seem to make the consequent dealing with him specific enough. But what if I thought of myself as a put-upon mother with a naughty child? How would I then deal with my own daughter? The moment I applied this substitution to my Frank, I discovered the how of taking his hand, the how of almost pulling him along with me, the how of giving him the glass of water. These actions became specific, in fact loaded, and I must give special emphasis to the fact that Frank was, at this moment, like a child to me, and something brand new happened between me and the actor. I no longer needed to use my daughter. I had used her to find this reality on stage. In each example I have made, I have also spelled out the action which resulted from the substitution. Manuela grabbed the chemise and hid it. Sidney Greenstreet made me throw and kick Falstaff's letter. My substitution for Bernie Dodd's word made me leap from my chair. My daughter made me pull my husband to the sink. I have completed my substitutions by making them synonymous with the actor on stage. The object, the word, the event of my stage life, and found a consequent character action. I've used the past to make the present real. I am not playing in the past, but now. I have looked for substitutions to believe the now, to feel the now, and done both in order to find a spontaneous action for now. I will probably repeat this 100 times because it is so often misunderstood. But your substitutions are complete only when they have become synonymous with this actor, this play's events, these objects you are using in your stage life, and produce a significant action. You may even forget your original source. Fine. I'm certain you have seen an actor on stage with real tears streaming down his face. If your only response was, "Oh look, real water," This actor was going to his original substitution, was doing his homework on stage, and was failing to connect it to his stage life. Consequently, his tears could not move an audience or allow them to have genuine empathy for the character they were observing. To work for an involvement for its own sake on stage bogs down the movement of the play, disconnects you from the play, makes you blind and deaf to the play. Beware. There is still another kind of substitution which I find important in my own work. It is even less literal than those I've already described, and less parallel to the character. It is even more personal and private, but may be suggestible and stimulating to the actor, in addition to his direct life experience. I refer to such intangibles as colors, textures, music, elements of nature. I must admit that I do not know how to teach this, and I assiduously avoid teaching this. I can only make you aware that these essences can be valuable sources and warn you to keep them to yourself, as I do myself. If a new character has to me elements of light blue, a field of clover, a scarlatti sonata, a toy poodle, a shiny blue pond, a piece of cut crystal, these essences may be of value to my sense of self, my particularizations for my character. But if these highly personal concepts are brought out into the open by the director or by me, they always become a hindrance to me. I have heard a well-known director complain to an actor, "I asked for October tones. You're playing in November tones." What is the actor supposed to do with that? If the director tells me, "I want this character to be like Scarlatti, like a poodle, like a field of clover," I feel swamped by a generality. I question what his statement means to him, and I head straight for general, quality playing, rather than specific character action. I start illustrating a prancing poodle with sharp little Scarlatti-like tones, and I look to the director for approval. Is it tinkly enough? French enough? Can you smell the clover? The essence stops functioning for me altogether. Even the playwright can do a similar thing to you. Tennessee Williams says of Blanche Dubois that there is something about her that suggests a moth. This image of his blocked me so that I saw myself with fluttering arms on tippy toes, banging into a light bulb larger than myself. I had a hard time overcoming it. There is much in a creative process that is almost intangibly real and mysterious. Why compound the felony and make it more so? Please remember that in any example I have given you for substitutions, I was only making my own examples. You must find your own substitutions if they are to be of real value to you. If an example I have made has stirred you, it was an accident, or you simply took mine as a suggestion and found your own, possibly a similar one. Find your own substitutions, a warehouse full of them. And let me warn you of the great trap of sharing your substitutions with anyone. Don't fall victim to the temptation of revealing your little goodies to your director or your fellow actors. Do you know what I'm using here? Etc. The minute others are in on your source, and they will probably be extremely interested in knowing what it is, they become an audience to your source and evaluate its consequent action accordingly, rather than finding their own relationship to the action. You have truly let the cat out of the bag. Your substitution will be gone for you, unusable from then on. Substitution is not an end in itself, not an end to involve you for self-involvement's sake without consequent action. Let me state strongly, in case any of you have misunderstood, that substitution is the aspect of the work which strengthens your faith and your sense of reality in each stage of the total work on character. It is a way of bringing about justified, personal character actions, particularizing or to make something particular, as opposed to generalizing, or to keep general, is an essential for everything in acting, from identification of the character right down to the tiniest physical object you come in contact with. I use the term particularization so often that it deserves a little time and space. I can make an object, a person, a circumstantial fact, etc., particular by examining what is there and breaking it down into detail. As a simple example, let me take an ashtray. On occasion, the ashtray given me by the prop man will be, under examination, exactly the sort of ashtray called for in the play. Instead of simply saying, "It's an ashtray sitting on the table in this Greenwich Village garret," I will see that it is tin, sprayed to look like copper, probably came from the dime store, has 2 grooves to hold cigarettes, is shiny with a few cigarette stains in the bottom, is lightweight, and I can deal with it correctly under the given circumstances. I have made what is there particular, rather than just assuming any ashtray. Now, this same ashtray sits on an elegant marble table in a Park Avenue penthouse. It is supposed to belong there, and from the audience may even pass for elegant. I will make it particular by endowing it with qualities it does not possess by substituting from my previous knowledge of elegant ashtrays. Now, I turn it into real copper. Assume it comes from Tiffany, and is heavier than it looks, and would even look better if it were buffed up with polish. I can make it even more particular if necessary by finding psychological endowments or substitutions. My husband gave it to me last week for a sentimental occasion. I had wanted it for a long time, and now it sits proudly on my coffee table. Obviously, the simple act of flipping an ash into this ashtray will be influenced by the way in which I have made it particular to me in my character in the play. Every detail of place, objects, relationships to others, my main character needs, my immediate needs, and obstacles must be made particular. Nothing should be allowed to remain general.
Let me show you something. I always say we never stand when we can sit. The standing here was continuously places. If I get up and I'm going to get you a drink, and I head for the bar, right? And I go here, now I'm going to get you a drink. Now you say something to me.
Chapter 4, Emotional Memory. Emotional memory, or emotional recall, deals with the problem of finding a substitution in order to release that big burst of tears, the shriek of terror, the fit of laughter, etc., demanded by the playwright, the director, or by yourself as interpreter when the given circumstances of an immediate event in the play, something done to you by something or someone, fail to stimulate you sufficiently to bring it about spontaneously. Sometimes the direct substitution, Lynn Fontan for Fräulein von Bernberg, is not suggestible enough to bring about the desired result. Then, the hunt must go deeper in the search for the memory of a big emotional moment. Occasionally, the term emotional memory is interchanged with sense memory. To me, they're different. I link emotional memory with the recall of a psychological or emotional response to an event moving in on me, which produces sobbing, laughter, screaming, etc. I use the term sense memory in dealing with physiological sensations, heat, cold, hunger, pains, etc. Of course, it is true that a physical sensation, such as heat or cold, can produce emotions such as irritation, depression, or anxiety. Likewise, an emotional response can be accompanied by or produce physical sensations such as getting hot or goose pimply, becoming nauseated. In life, an emotion occurs when something happens to us which momentarily suspends our reasoning control, and we are unable to cope with this event logically. This is not to be confused with hysteria, a state in which one is flooded by uncontrollable emotions, becomes illogical to the point of losing awareness of and contact with his surroundings and sense of reality, a state to be avoided by the actor at all costs. At the moment of the release of the control, plus our adjustment to an attempt at control, we are overcome by tears, by laughter, or we rage, we bang our fists, or melt with pleasure, to mention only a few results. As pleasurable as the idea of a big emotion may seem to an actor, human beings do not want this loss of control and usually make an attempt to cope with the emotion as it hits them. If we realize that we did not want this emotion, this loss of control in our real lives at the time when it occurred, we can see how difficult a process it must be for the actor, who must now attempt to recall the emotion and experience it all over again. This time it is recalled in the service of the play as a genuine revelation of a human being, not for any kind of self-indulgence or wallowing about. If the character the actor is portraying is self-indulgent emotionally, or caught by hysterics, the actor's selection must still be made to serve the play, not his own need. To bring about tears, the beginning actor's tendency is to think sad things, to pump for that mood or that general state of being, to try to remember a sad occasion, the story of that occasion, and then pray to God that somehow he will be catapulted into an appropriate emotional response somewhere along the way. I used to make all of these mistakes and could never understand why once in a while, somewhere along the line, something did indeed happen to me. But I must emphasize that it happened only once in a while, not inevitably, and it usually took a long time before it occurred. Sometimes I managed to work myself into a near trauma off stage, which brought me on with the sensation of moving in glue. After a few years, I discovered intuitively that what sent me correctly was a tiny remembered object only indirectly connected with the sad event. A polka dot tie, an ivy leaf on a stucco wall, a smell or sound of sizzling bacon, a grease spot on the upholstery, things as seemingly illogical as those. I used these small objects as stimuli successfully, and questioned their logic only in discussion. Later I learned from Dr. Jacques Palacci, a close friend trained in psychology, psychiatry, and human behavior, that this little indirect object was the release object, a release of the sensor which moves along with us and says, "Don't lose control." This apparently insignificant object had been unconsciously perceived and associated with the original emotional experience. To experience for yourself what I am speaking about, tell a friend the story of an unhappy event in your life. Tell him, for example, about a time when your lover walked out on you, blaming you unjustly for infidelity. Now tell your friend what surrounded the event. Describe everything you can remember about the weather, the pattern of the drapes, a branch brushing against the window, the rumpled collar of your lover's shirt, the smell of the aftershave he was wearing, a frayed corner of the carpet, the tune that was playing on the radio as he left, etc., etc., etc. One of these objects will suddenly release the pain anew, and you will weep again. The consequence of this discovered procedure is endless. You will learn to build your own storehouse of little trigger objects. In rehearsal, you will not spend endless time on digging for past events. In performance, you will avoid leaving the stage, so to speak, while your mind wanders through a series of past adventures, hoping that you will find a specific stimulus. You should have found and filed away many, many specific objects, one of which you will now connect and make synonymous with the event, the person, or the object of your stage life to trigger the response you need. As for questioning the logic of the object you use from your own experience to take the place of the one you need on stage, let me give an example, especially for the literal-minded student, which I assure you is not intended to be facetious. Suppose you are working on Uncle Vanya and you need a big emotional response for the moment when Uncle Vanya surprises Yelena in the arms of Astrov, a moment when rejection and a sense of loss storm in on him. Suppose that when you have isolated a red apron from an experience in a kitchen when your girlfriend's aunt, wearing a red apron, rejected you and turned you out. How do you know that Vanya himself didn't link the moment with Yelena with his own red apron, his own sudden recall of a moment of betrayal, with his own early rejection? After all of our emotional reactions are based on a kind of pile-up from our past. I must warn you at this point to avoid the examination of any past experience which you have never talked about or wanted to talk about. Here you will be on dangerous ground because you will not know what can happen to you, and without an understanding or degree of objectivity to the experience, it is useless to you artistically. There are teachers who actually force actors into dealing with something buried, their response to the death of a parent or the trauma of a bad accident. What results is hysteria or worse, and is, in my opinion, anti-art. We are not pursuing psychotherapy. If you feel mentally sick or disturbed and in need of it, by all means go to a trained doctor or therapist, but not to an acting teacher. When I say that you must have distance from the experience you wish to use as an actor, I am not referring to time, but to understanding. In 1938, I had an experience with the death of someone I loved deeply, which I still cannot fully cope with or discuss, and therefore I cannot use as an actress. Yet I have also had an experience in the morning, which I was able to digest and put to use by evening. Actions themselves, verbal and physical, can generate strong emotions and can sometimes be as stimulating to an emotional release as any remembered inner object. By inner object, I mean an object not outwardly present, but an object existing and represented in one's mind only. The simple act of banging my fist on the table can bring about a feeling of rage. A logical reason or motivation for doing so can load the action for me. Motivated pleading with someone for forgiveness and sending a verbal or physical action of begging, stroking, or clutching may produce a waterfall of tears. The act of tickling someone gently can make me join in a fit of giggles. I don't mean to recommend that you make a practice of predetermining the expression of the action to find the emotion, but there is a continuous feeding of the action by the sensation or emotion, and the emotion is furthered by the action. When you claim that an emotion or a recalled object is wearing out for you by repetition, that it has lost freshness, you are failing technically because of a number of possible reasons. 1. You are stopping to demand that you feel because you have not made your object synonymous with the one on stage. 2. You are anticipating how or at what second the emotion should manifest itself. 3. You have dwelt on the emotion for its own sake rather than for furthering your stage action. 4. You are weighing the degree of intensity of previous use of the emotional experience. 5. You are fearful that the emotion will elude you, etc., etc. Is it not monstrous that this player here, but in a fiction, in a dream of passion, could force his soul so to his own conceit, that from her working all his visage waned, tears in his eyes, distraction in's aspect, a broken voice, and his whole function suiting with forms to his conceit? Hamlet, Act 2, Scene 2. Conceit means concept here, not vanity, and this is still what it's all about. Don't you agree?
Now, your standing is dependent on whether you're going to go to bed, but you know, internally, instinctively, you know that that's where you're going to head.
Chapter 5, Sense Memory. Sense memory, the recall of physical sensations, is often easier for the actor than the recall of his emotions. If we as actors have any occupational hazards, hypochondria is perhaps one of them. Most of us are interested in our sensations and examine and discuss them on occasion make more of them than may be normal for a non-actor. It's all right as long as we remember that these sensations can be usefully expressed. Some actors are so highly sensitized and suggestible that a mere conversation about a pain or chill or itch will convince them that they are similarly afflicted. Those actors are the exceptions. Most of us have to learn a correct technique for producing sensations so that they will be readily available to us on stage. Since the body has an innate sense of truth, we must learn some physiological facts to help us avoid the violation of the physical truth. Sometimes, by a mere incorrect bodily adjustment, we can shatter our faith in a whole sequence of our stage existence. It always irritates me when a director or teacher or fellow actor commands me to relax, or concentrate, or use my imagination, when my failure in these areas springs from a lack of understanding of the given task. If a playwright or director specifies that I should be sound asleep and then wake up at the play's opening, and I haven't learned what is physically entailed in sleeping or waking up, I will probably lie down and fight for relaxation while actually my muscles tense up and my nerves tingle with anxiety. I will fight for concentration as my mind races to inconsequentials because no one has told me on what to concentrate. And my imagination fails me completely in the premise of sleeping or waking because no one has told me down what paths to send it. Even my sensory memory doesn't help, unless I were to be allowed an hour or so, and then I might actually fall asleep, which in turn would not help me to wake up on cue. It's a relief to discover what the simple physiological process of sleeping and waking entails and to find out how I can reproduce it in a matter of seconds, how I can execute it quickly, even after running from my dressing room, after a quick costume change, jumping into the bed on stage as the curtain rises and the lights come up, and convince myself and the audience that I have been deep asleep and am now waking up. To do this, settle your body snugly into the bed, concentrating only on one area, the shoulders or the hips or the feet, for example. Now, close your eyes and center them straight ahead under your eyelids, which is the true sleep position, not downward the way they usually are positioned when we first close our eyes. Then direct your inner attention to an abstract object not connected with the given circumstances of the play, a leaf, a cloud, a wave. Now, direct your inner attention from the abstract object to something in the given circumstances. What time is it? Have I overslept? What must I do today? Etc. Then open your eyes, sit up, and pursue your objective. Your eyes will feel heavy, your body slow down, as if after a deep sleep, and by reflex your entire behavior will be influenced for the ensuing activities. If you are supposed to yawn, you must learn that the physical reason for yawning is a need for oxygen in the brain. Most of you open your mouths wide and exhale, and then jump to another action because it felt so peculiar. Instead, you should inhale deeply as you push your jaw down and back until the mouth opens, and you continue to pull the air deeply into your lungs before forcing it up into your head as you exhale. You can create a yawn at will in this way so that your eyes may even water. You can fumble about on stage and believe it is very dark when there's actually enough light for the last row of the balcony to see you. Once you understand that when you actually are in the dark, your eyes are wide open and the muscles around the eyes are expanded until the eyes feel almost glazed. I used to think this occurred because I was trying to see better in the dark. Then I realized the converse was true. Eye perception was deadened even more by this muscular expansion than by the darkness. But my sense of touch and sense of sound were heightened. Concentration was focused on the feet, the fingers, and the ears. Experiment with this, and you will discover that through the one correct adjustment of the eyes, you can actually believe that it is dark. Your hands and feet will truly grope for a path through the furniture, and there will be no embarrassing indication of stumbling around. Bringing about physical sensations for the character's stage life is fraught with many of the same pitfalls as the reproduction of emotional sensations. The actor's tendency is to think hot all over, to think cold, tired, headachy, sick, and then to wait anxiously for sensations while nothing happens. Or sometimes he waits and is amazed when by accident something does happen. If you are supposed to be hot, you must first ask yourself where on your body you are the hottest. Localize one area, for example, under the arms. Remember a sensation of stickiness, a perspiration trickling down, and then search for what you do to alleviate the sensation. Raise your arms slightly. See if you can pull your shirt or blouse sleeve away from the underarm to let in a little air. In that moment of adjustment or attempt to overcome the heat, you will have a sensation of heat. The rest of the body will feel hot too. You are to be cold. Do not think cold all over. Localize one area you remember most vividly. For instance, a draft on the back of your neck. Try to recall the sensation and then immediately hunch up your shoulders and stiffen your back a little. Even make yourself shiver if you like, and you will have a sensation of cold. We often shiver on purpose, not only involuntarily, because shivering increases the circulation. The body will respond to the point where you may end up hopping from foot to foot and rubbing your hands in an effort to get warm, although it might actually be a very warm day. Fatigue is a condition called for in endless scenes. How often have you seen the entire action dissipated and out of focus because the actor was dragging about and generally trying to feel tired all over? Well, there are so many varieties of fatigue. Ask yourself why you are tired and where. Suppose you have been typing for hours. There is fatigue and tension in your back, across your shoulder blades. Now get up and stretch your back. Put your head back and try to relax the shoulder muscles. You will feel exhausted. Or remember your fatigue on a hot day in August, when you walked for hours in thin-soled shoes and your feet were hot and sore and more tired than the rest of your body. Try to walk gently on your heels to alleviate the soreness and burning under the balls of your feet. Your whole body will follow suit and be accompanied by a strong sensation of tiredness. I am emphasizing the adjustments to overcoming the sensations because I believe that the sensation occurs most fully at the moment when we are occupied with the attempt to overcome it, not when we wait for it while trying only to imagine and remember it. Nor do I mean that you should jump to an outer indication of the adjustment without faith in the cause, or that you should concern yourself with a desire to show that you have the sensation. Sometimes you question whether the sensations and consequent adjustments you make will communicate directly enough. Will the audience know that I'm tired, etc.? If on the street you see people without knowing the circumstances of their lives, it may look to you as though the person with a headache is tired, or that the person who has a headache is hot, or that someone with a backache is chilly. However, in a play, your conditions are backed up by the playwright and other actors. Your headache will be referred to. The heat will be shared by others. The nausea will make you ask for a doctor, etc. The concern for showing the condition must lead to indication and falseness. It is not your responsibility to show the condition, but to have it so you believe it and deal with it in terms of the play's action. Even the old cliché of wiping the sweat off the forehead to illustrate heat can become new and valid if you stimulate the remembrance of the sweat, the prickling and trickling down from your hairline so that you need to wipe it off with the back of your hand. If you require a cough, find the exact spot in your throat where you remember a tickle or scratch, and you must cough to relieve it. If you want a head cold, a stopped-up nose, localize the sense of swelling in the uvula, the soft lobe hanging down at the back of your soft palate. And try to swallow as you contract. Suddenly your nose will feel stuffy, and if you blow it, you might even produce mucus. For nausea, pinpoint the queasiness of the stomach. Inflate your cheeks slightly. Wait for saliva to gather. Breathe deeply, and you'll be convinced you feel sick. For headaches, recall a specific one in a specific spot. For example, directly over the right eye. What kind? Throbbing? What can you do to ease it? Slightly push into it? Rise above it? Pull back out of it? These are tiny adjustments, but after stimulating the imagination to the remembered feeling, they will bring it into the present for you. For a burn, recall the thin, tight feel of the skin on your fingertip and how it aches. Then blow on it. Flip your hand back and forth to ease it, and you'll be convinced you just burned it. Sometimes it's only the oozing blood which frightens you when you cut yourself, but remember when it hurts and what you do as you dab the wound with iodine. Drunkenness, which crops up in countless tragic and comedic scenes, seems to be one of the most difficult to make specific, and traps even fine actors into a series of clichés. Perhaps it is because in this state, with its endless variations from slightly tipsy to staggering to thick speech, we have the hardest time remembering. To find it specifically entails the same steps you have used in the search for other physical sensations. First, localize the most suggestible area of your body, give in to it, and then attempt to overcome it. In my case, it is wobbly knees, a loose, weakened condition which I attempt to correct by straightening and strengthening the knees. The other sensations of dizziness, lack of eye, and manual focus seem to follow. My tongue seems fat and swollen so that I have a wild need to over-articulate. When I am tipsy, it usually manifests itself in a psychological need to talk too much, and an assumption that everyone is interested in anything I have to say. Sometimes you ask, what if I work for a headache and it stays with me? I can only answer, work for an aspirin. Remember the sensation when the headache eases off, when you hold yourself very still as the tension leaves, and even the back of your neck relaxes as you realize the pain is gone. This technique, recalling a localized sensation and finding a physical adjustment to alleviate it, is applicable to any condition you may be called upon to play. The accumulation of a lifetime of sensations should be sufficient with our newly acquired technique to serve us for any condition or combination of conditions demanded by the playwright. Even if we are to portray pregnancy or labor and haven't had a baby, or are called upon to have consumption or a heart attack, or to be stabbed to death, or any sensation which, except for having a baby, we hope we won't ever experience, we can still find them within our command if we apply these principles, coupled with a little research on the medical manifestation of the condition. Use the knowledge of substitution to bring bronchitis or pneumonia or a simple chest cold to Camille's consumption, the remembered giddiness from too much cough syrup for a feeling of drunkenness in case you have never had a drink, or the moment when you stayed underwater too long and came gasping to the surface as a substitute for strangulation, etc., etc. To all this, add the magic if of imagination to help tie it all up. If I were dying, if I were in labor. I trust that you now have sufficient examples to help you find your way for any sensory problem which might arise for you. Let me warn you of some common errors and misunderstandings in the use of sense memory. The sensations of heat, cold, headache, drunkenness, nausea, and illness, etc., are the conditions of the scene. Rarely is the scene about the cold or the headache. The discovery of the sensations and how they influence you is there to condition your actions truthfully in the scene and with sensory accuracy and faith, but it is not the final aim just to be cold or have that headache on stage. Furthermore, you are dictating the sensations. They are not dictating you. You will have the sensations to further the actions, but not so that they will take over and put you out of control. In line with this, let me state that if a dangerous or unpleasant sensory condition exists for you in your real life, at the same time that your character should have it on stage, avoid it at all costs. If you are really nauseated at the time of having to be nauseated in your stage life, simply avoid the condition, or the curtain may have to be wrung down. If you really have a headache over your right eye, work for a headache at the back of your head. Otherwise, the real headache may take over and put you out of control, unable to fulfill your stage life. If you are to be drunk, don't get drunk to be real, or the play will turn into something other than the author intended. In summation, let me state the opinion that a correctly functioning actor should ideally be the healthiest, least neurotic creature on earth, since he is putting his emotional and sensory life to use by expressing it for an artistic purpose. If he is employed in the theater, he has an opportunity of making use of his anxieties, hostilities, pent-up tenderness through an artistic expression. I think that perhaps the people who call us neurotic or vain or exhibitionistic are unaware how many talented actors are that way only because they are without work opportunities and therefore release their need for expression in alcohol or unreasonable behavior. Or perhaps these people are jealous that when we do function, we can do what they only dream of doing.
You're going to change your mind and sit down here and have it out with him here. Now you have to fight for relaxation. And your body is fighting to be relaxed. Always connect your first beat with an activity, with a physical activity. Take a sock off and then start talking and you'll be better off. Do you see what I mean?
Chapter 6, The Five Senses. As a nation, we have evidently become so desensitized that encounter groups, an essential part of whose program seems to be learning to touch each other, have sprung up all over the country. The daily hue and cry about an inability of human beings to communicate with each other means that not only do we not reach out to touch, but that we do not contact each other visually or auditorially. Our perceptions are dulled. Full human contact employs all the senses. The more intense they are, the more highly they are developed. The more available is the potential of the actor, his talent. As I've said before, this area of high sensitivity is where true talent lies. And what we make of this sensitivity determines whether or not we can call ourselves artists. A great danger is to take the five senses for granted. Most people do. Once you become aware that the sources which move in on you when you truly touch, taste, smell, see, and hear are endless, you must also realize that self-involvement deadens the senses, and vanity slaughters them until you end up playing alone and meaninglessly. There's an amusing story about John Barrymore and the time he was acting with his brother Lionel, whom he adored, and they were supposed to be enemies in the play. John found it difficult to execute the required actions because whenever he looked into Lionel's soft brown eyes, he melted with brotherly affection, and it seems that John detested the smell of musk oil, a perfume base, so he secretly sprinkled a little of the oil on his brother's costumes. Whenever Lionel came near him on stage, John was filled with loathing. I am not recommending this going to an outer reality for help when other substitutions fail, but am simply making an example of the power of smell as a stimulant. A particular odor of leather can send me to a shop on a quaint street in the Tyrol, and I feel the same excitement in romance as when I was there. Think how the scent of cologne or soap can affect you if it comes at you from someone you love. Think how that same scent will affect you by association as it wafts toward you from a casual passerby. How the smell and sound of sizzling bacon can produce a feeling of well-being. An unpleasant smell can be just as suggestive psychologically. Taste, whether it be of a kiss or of unpleasant medicine or something delicious to eat or strong liquor, is not only important but must be fully explored because in most instances on stage, you won't have the real thing, nor will you want it. Liquor should suffice as an example. If your taste buds were alert when you took a slug of bourbon or brandy, you will recall what happened to your mouth and throat and stomach. And if so, you will be able to endow that slug of colored water on stage with the same properties. If I have to peel and chop an onion on stage, I will probably use an apple or a potato, since the real onion might take over and put me out of control. It won't be difficult to endow the potato with the elements of the onion if I have discovered and been alert to the smell, the consequent congestion in the nose, and the sting in the eyes, which makes me cry. Suppose I have to bite into the onion or suck on a lemon. I want a powerful sense of taste, so that when I substitute another object for them on stage, I will have similar sensations and adjustments. Explore the endless variations of a simple handshake. If you really make contact, if it is something other than a mechanical social expression, whether you shake hands with a friend or an enemy, or if it is an introduction to an attractive member of the opposite sex, alert yourself to the texture of the skin when you make contact with it, the warmth or coolness of the hand, the dryness or dampness, the hardness or softness of the skin, the pressure or the lack of it in the grip. Start to become more aware of texture, not only of the flesh, but of cloth, wood, silver, glass, anything you contact physically, pleasant or otherwise, during the course of your day. Few people are lucky enough to have all five senses developed with equal intensity, but the actor must hope and pray and work for maximum visual and auditory receiving. The visual contact we make with another human being, or with something in nature, can act on us like a stroke of lightning, if we really open ourselves up to it. If you really see a delicate white birch or a giant redwood tree, you might weep. If you really look at a wave breaking on the shore with the sunlight shining through its crest and its foam, or a black cloud overtaking a little puffy white one, your heart may begin to pound. The same real taking in visually of a human being can produce, but soft, what light through yonder window breaks? It is the east, and Juliet is the sun. The contact our ears make with sound, with words, with melody and tonality, are just as crucial to the development and enrichment of our total instrument. To really receive the nuance of verbal action and tone of voice, rather than merely factually clicking it off with our auditory sense, makes the difference between a fine actor and a hack. Many of you make some common technical errors in looking and listening. An actor says, "I have such trouble really listening on stage." He's making contact with the individual word that is being sent to him in the mistaken notion that concentration on each word alone will allow him to hear better. Words are sent actively with content. You must listen for the intent of the words in order to receive them, giving the words meaning not only from their intention, but from your own point of view and expectation. I don't recommend that you make a rule of this or an excuse for this in your stage life, but in real life, we don't hear everything that's being said to us. If I propound a long theory on acting, and I am lucky, you will really hear about 3/4 of it. You will be weighing what you hear against what you already know or think you know, and your attention will often pursue your own paths, formulating the ideas in your own way. Something I have said 10 times during a term will arise anew, and an actor's face will light up. I have never heard that before. His assumptions have changed, and he hears it now in the new framework of understanding. So, on stage, if you particularize the content and intent of what is being said, and hear that under the given circumstances, listening should no longer be a problem for you. We also listen with our eyes. Our eyes, as well as our ears, evaluate and interpret. We interpret content and intention from an expression or movement which the action has given to the words. "You're full of baloney," sent aggressively with a smirk, might infuriate me. The same words sent with a grin and a pat on the back might send me into gales of laughter, depending on who has done what to me. In the same way that I do not contact the individual isolated word while listening, so I do not fasten my eyes to a partner without letting go in order to really receive him while I'm talking. Looking, as well as listening, hinges on needs. Seeing is also balanced against expectations. immediate needs, and your past knowledge of the subject. I sometimes laugh when an actor fixes his partner endlessly during the scene and claims he is working for eye contact. Try telling someone about an event that just happened to you and force yourself to keep looking at him while talking. Probably halfway through your first sentence, you will want to look away, not because you don't want to see him, but because while really seeing him, you lost contact with the inner objects you were talking about, and so you will forget what you're saying. Actually, while we talk, we look intermittently at the person to whom we're talking in order to see how they react to what we're saying, to see if we have their attention, to see if they get the point, etc. What we see in them at these moments conditions how we continue our tale. In between these moments of eye contact, we contact the inner objects we are dealing with, and our outer, secondary focus is on something inconsequential in the place. Listening and looking are certainly not mechanical processes, but are linked to the center of our psychological and physical being. Simulated looking and listening must produce bad acting. Because of the enormous importance of the five senses, there should be continuous work on heightening and sharpening them. Anything dormant which you might awaken through daily concentrated attention to your senses will add to your growth as an actor. Unclutter yourselves. Open yourselves up to your fullest capacity to give meaning to what you receive when you see, when you hear, when you taste, when you smell, when you touch.
If I'm waiting for an entrance, if it's no more than an adjustment of my belt just before I come in, I'm more in action than when I'm standing and trying to sift all the homework and who am I and who was my grandmother and what am I doing here and what's it.
Chapter 7. Thinking. You enter, stop to flick on the lights, take 2 steps into the room, and then the lights come up. The audience bursts into laughter. Such disasters have happened to us all, and if you attempt to verbalize all the things you thought about in the seconds that it took from the click of the switch to the laughter of the audience, it would probably take you half an hour. Thought moves with such lightning rapidity that any attempt to slow it down is inaccurate and so must bring about false behavior on stage. I have often seen an actor sitting on stage strangely knotted with tension, making faces, furrowing his brow, then smiling, then making a pensive expression. When I ask, "What were you doing?" he answers, "I was thinking." Feeling, obligated to illustrate thought, bodily or facially, comes from the mistaken notion that the character's thoughts manifest themselves in an organized progression, like dialogue, complete with stage directions, like a script. Sometimes the diligent actor mistakenly goes so far as to write out his character's thoughts as if they were indeed dialogue. Real thinking precedes, is accompanied by, and follows action. Real thinking is active. I sit down, not in order to think, but to rest. I rise to get a glass of water and walk to my desk to pick up a letter. While I sit, rise, or walk, I am thinking. If I put on my coat before going to market, I'm not thinking only of my coat, unless it is giving me a problem. I'm mentally dealing with my grocery list, or with a laundryman, or with a friend who's coming to dinner tonight. My thoughts spring from the contact with these inner objects, things or people not present in the room only as images in the mind, and bring out an inner action. Inwardly, contact in the grocery list may produce thought about a can of imported French beans and the shelf on which it rests at the supermarket. The beans may lead me to consider how often they're sold out, and a possible argument with the manager of the store, or weighing the idea of going to a more expensive store where these beans are more readily available. Contacting the laundryman can produce a remembered event about my last argument with him over the strength of the bleach, and consideration of how I will deal with him today. The friend who is coming to dinner may produce speculation about the new playwright he's bringing with him this evening. In other words, By contacting these inner objects, not present in the room, my thoughts flow forward quickly. Meanwhile, the physical task of putting on my coat is completed, having been inadvertently influenced by my thoughts. I may have yanked at a button when my inner attention went to the laundryman. I never ask, "What were you thinking?" Instead, I ask, "What were your inner objects?" So that you will get out of the habit of even verbally analyzing your thought process. I can accept deliberate thinking only from a philosopher who organizes and arranges the otherwise chaotic and subjective process of human thought into an objective viewpoint of life. He's taking himself out of the action. We actors are involved in it. To act is to do, not to think. The actor's thinking depends on the subjective process of weighing the course of action by a contact with inner and outer objects. Thoughts and objects which intrude on the concentration on your stage life, those which make for unwanted distractions, most often come from the havoc of your daily private life. A desire for success can move in on you. Who's out front? An agent? Someone you love? A critic? A rival? Vanity. All such destructive distractions should be dumped at the stage door before you enter your dressing room. The fight against these intrusions on true thought can be conquered only by strengthening and enlarging the circle of inner objects belonging to the play, and by using them to produce the character's thinking in a true lifestyle. It must be clear to you now that if any inner object in the play is not real to you, it will have no consequence in producing genuine thought. It will be a dead-end object. Obviously, the thinking process which accompanies the immediate give and take with another character on stage, or the thoughts connected to direct action of the play, are easily triggered by the partner, the event itself, and by your sensory awareness. The thoughts are anchored to the events and to the other characters. Not only must these people and events and the things which tangibly surround you be clothed in reality for you by particularization and substitution, but everything that has happened, what you expect to happen, and what is happening, connected with the surrounding circumstances as well. The larger your selection of inner objects within these areas, the more food you will have for forward-moving thought and action. Your objects will channel your attention into the private circle of your character's life. You cannot dictate the order of your thoughts or attempt to pigeonhole them in compartments. You must keep them fluid for your character's needs.
And I say the 3 steps are, what did I just do? What am I doing now? What do I want? And go for it. Those are the 3 steps that will get you there. Not body exercises, not relaxation exercises, not workouts, not inner work. Can get you in glue. You don't know which foot to start with.
Chapter 8. Walking and Talking. On occasion, I'm certain you have found yourself sitting comfortably in a scene, relaxing into the cushions of the sofa, puffing on a cigarette. You were occupied and involved with another character in the play, and unaware of your body in any sense except that you believed you were there. Then you rose and stood for a while as the conversation continued. Suddenly, the very act of standing became awkward. You became aware of your hands as unnecessary appendages. Your legs and feet tensed up. You lost a sense of character and place, and you became an exposed actor on stage, not a human being in a room. Then you protected yourself, attempting to regain composure by assuming a stance, a stage pose. This protective pose was probably borrowed from your earliest and most inept stage experience. There are many reasons for this kind of physical discomfort and inaccurate adjustment, but the most probable one is that you were gratuitously executing stage business, unjustified blocking, following the command, "He rises." You had no relevant justification for the rise, or for whatever arrested you in a standing position, and this consequently caused you to lose character and orientation to the place. If the rise from the sofa had been connected with the need of the given circumstances, let us say that you rise to get a drink for your friend to make him feel more at home and welcome, and that on your way to the bar, a piece of astounding news has arrested you in a standing position while your attention is riveted to the subject, and that only when the attention waned did you continue to the bar. The standing would be an involving and simple task, releasing the body from the sense of being hung up. Arthur Hopkins, the producer and director, once said, "The reason for walking is destination." Let me add that the movement you create must come from carefully selected action, which allows for the organic development of the character and the primary action of the scene. Even a trap, set for us over and over again by the playwright or the director, "He wanders restlessly," does not have to lead to the usual cliché of mechanical, tense, and general stage wandering. Each movement of true wandering has destination, is focused on a relevant object that we deal with in order to further the character and the story. Suppose that you are alone at home and waiting for a telephone call or a visit from a friend bringing news of a job. You may be impelled to walk to the window to see if he's in sight, and then you may cross to the telephone and consider calling him. You may reject the idea and take it out on the phone by giving it a little push. You cross to the liquor cabinet and actually pick up a glass, which you then quickly replace because you have, or your character has, a drinking problem. The expected friend is always criticizing your untidiness, so you cross to the armchair to rub a grease spot on the upholstery. You cross to a wall mirror and check your hairdo. Meanwhile, your mind races from one inner object to the other. Those objects, directly connected with your friend, the possibilities of the job, what might stand in its way, etc. In life, your wanderings may seem to lead you to irrelevant objects. On stage, where every second counts, the objects should be selected and dealt with to reveal something new about the character or the circumstances, or both. The seemingly illogical objects you have contacted in a strange order must be substantiated by the logic of the play. You are helped in physical reality by the very clothes you choose to wear. Your psychological state of being, your sense of self, as well as the physical manifestation of it, is strongly influenced by what you wear. Even in a simple walk down the street to the corner drugstore to buy a tube of toothpaste, you must make your clothing particular in likes, dislikes, appearance, and with sensory awareness. First assume you are dressed in tight blue jeans, a long sloppy Joe sweater, and worn sneakers. Now, assume the same destination in identical circumstances of weather, time of day, preceding and upcoming events, only you are wearing a new classic suit, elegant shoes, fancy kid gloves, and a bright silk scarf around your neck. Then try changing only one thing in the latter example. You think your slightly soiled slip is showing? See how these elements change your entire psychological state of being? And consequently, the physical manifestations of a simple walk down the street. I might take something as small and unimportant as my slip is showing, for the center of the physical life of a whole character. Clothing so influences my character, is so crucial to me, that I would find it impossible to come to a rehearsal for Blanche in A Streetcar Named Desire, dressed in slacks and sneakers, as it would be for me to work on St. Joan in a frilly chiffon dress and high-heeled shoes. I could barely get the words out of my mouth sitting around a rehearsal table at a reading. Of course, the total animation of the body is brought about by a correct incorporation of surrounding circumstances, weather, time, character needs, relationship to the things and people that surround me, plus main needs and immediate needs, and so is the animation of the words of the character. They are the messenger of my wishes. The action of the words, how I will send them, for what purpose and to whom, under what circumstances, hinges solely on what I want or need at the moment. This is what must make the words inevitable for my character. Delivering the words mechanically with set, intellectualized intonations projecting them beyond the object they are trying to reach and into the audience in the old-fashioned manner, or mumbling without verbal intention or action in the modern manner, all come from a misunderstanding of true verbal action. The errors can arise even before rehearsals have begun. The misinformed, diligent actor, if he has time, will sometimes memorize the words and mechanize the inflections before he comes to the first reading of the play. And this could be fatal to his final performance. During rehearsals, he can hunt for and find intentions for his character. He can attempt to genuinely receive from his partners and his surroundings, and still he will fall back into the identical pattern of the mechanical and rigid line readings he had begun with. He can no more change it than he could change arbitrary and unjustified stage blocking, which had been arrived at and set for quick convenience. We must learn what our character wants, from whom and under what circumstances, if we are to be propelled into genuine verbal action. Physical actions are the necessary balance for verbal actions. When the actor is truly alive on stage, there is an endless variety of interaction between verbal and physical behavior. Ideally, the audience should be unable to differentiate whether he walks when he is talking or talks when he is walking.
If the body isn't there, nothing else. We talk, we feel, we think, but it comes out of our body.
Chapter 9. Improvisation. Improvisations, which serve for a better understanding of the reality of character, circumstances, time and place, emotions, and the possibilities of varied action, can be of tremendous value. They can even bear fruit in the creation of the physical and verbal life of an entire play, not conceived by a playwright, as exemplified so beautifully in the story The Theatre of Paul Sills. I'm sure we agree that acting is the response to an assumption by doing something to somebody at a given place and time in order to bring about human behavior, which can be seen and heard by an audience. Therefore, the value of improvisational exercises away from concrete sequences of the play to find spontaneous actions and emotions must become obvious. Improvisations of a kind are continuously taking place, whether we are creatively testing the text by reading it, or are on our feet, opening up an imaginative playground. Everything and anything can be improvised, and some of the findings will be of service for a given play. We should be guided by the game of make-believe, which we played so well when we were children. Avoid general ad-libbing. Set up time and place, and objectives, and who you are. Surprise each other as partners. Don't paraphrase. Use the magic if in endless variations, and you might come up with gold.
So all the thinking and talking and feeling, if the body isn't there, it's useless.
Chapter 10, Reality. I can't believe it. This isn't real. How often do we say this about an overpoweringly real event in life? We are balancing the experience against the daily, ordinary manifestations of life. Christopher Fry once said, "Reality is incredible. Reality is a whirlwind. What we call reality is a false god, the dull eye of custom." We have to open all our senses and innermost feelings to the extraordinary realities of existence. We have to receive these realities with innocence and freshness, as though we had just been born. To create, one has to take known elements and make something new of them, and as we have only a few hours of compressed life on stage, our creation better count. We must take from life, and what we take must have pertinence. A mere imitation of nature in its familiar daily aspects is the antithesis of art. In the preceding chapters, I've not yet differentiated between truth in life and truth on stage. I have continuously stressed life realities, and will continue to do so, in an effort to steer away from the misconceptions and customs of old theater conventions, false theatricality, tricks, and gimmicks. facts. But truth in life as it is not truth on stage. If I bring real snow into the theater, it will melt, even before the curtain goes up. I remember a play in which real milk boiled over on cue on the stage stove. The audience was disillusioned as they audibly speculated on how this had been mechanically achieved. In Look Back in Anger, Mary Ewer ironed with a real steam iron. Not only did the audience murmur, "Real steam?" as they missed what she was saying, but at one performance she was scalded and the curtain was wrung down. There's a lovely story about the old German actor, Albert Bassermann, during rehearsals for a play in which it was supposed to rain. The director and the designer were worrying about real water and how it could be produced on stage. Bassermann interrupted them. "When I come on stage, it rains." And everything in his behavior convinced you that it did. I once played with an actor who had to take me by the arms to shake me. After showing him that I had to put more makeup on my bruised arms than on my face, he apologized with, "I'm sorry, but I really felt it," and promptly went on stage and bruised me again. Finally, at one performance, I screamed as he dug his fingers into the muscles of my arms. He forgot his lines and let go of me in wild confusion. Backstage, he confronted me. "You weren't supposed to scream there." I explained, "I'm sorry, but I really felt it." He never hurt me again. It is not real simply to slug it out in a stage fight and possibly send an actor into the orchestra pit or to the hospital. Really hurting someone is like the boiling milk. The audience concerns itself with a wounded actor instead of with the character he is portraying. To bring about a real fight requires the detailed and controlled definition of each movement. The physical action must be as concrete as the words of the playwright. The intruding realities which spring from our private lives must be put aside so that our stage realities will be allowed to evolve spontaneously. If my Romeo has garlic on his breath, it is unreal to the play. It is also unreal if I use it as is. So many actors employ this phrase, evidently meaning that whatever moves in on them on stage is supposed to be spontaneously put to use. In Romeo and Juliet, garlic is not a part of Shakespeare's dictum. I can plead with the actor after the performance not to eat garlic again, and if this fails, try to ignore it or desperately endow it with attar of roses. To swat at a live roach on a stage in a room that should be a palace may not only be irrelevant to the play and the character, but will take the audience away from the truth of the stage life. You must see what you have to see in order to tell the story, or see it so that it doesn't distort the story. To go from the ridiculous to the sublime, I'd like to cite the example of Jean-Louis Barrault's Hamlet, in the scene of his advice to the players. While the chief player was emotionally reciting about Hecuba, Hamlet quietly approached him and literally lifted a teardrop from his cheek, balancing it on 2 fingers and regarding it in wonder. It later catapulted him into, "Is it not monstrous that this player here," etc. This is an example of poetic action which might never occur in life, but which became real and deeply meaningful on stage because Barrault really did it and believed it so that we in the audience did too. In our search for genuine emotion and sensation and truthful behavior and action, we should never forget that selection is our goal, nor should we forget the obligation to the playwright. We can perhaps aim to give him even more than he had hoped for by our revelation of the detail of the human being he envisaged. In defining the difference between reality in life and reality in art, Tolstoy said, "Something is added to nature which wasn't there before. That something is the artist's point of view and his power of selection, which comes from life and makes for new life."
The exercises and why I devised them. Years ago, when I worked a lot and played a lot, There were obviously times in between when I had nothing to do. There were many technical problems that nobody seemed able to solve for me, which arose, like suddenly panicking with an awareness of the audience.
The object exercises. A performing musician, a singer, or a dancer is extremely fortunate in that he is presented with specific exercises from the time he decides to pursue his chosen art form. He is forced into certain disciplines and consequently learns to develop them. He must use them daily, and they stay with him until the end of his career. He can practice them at home and put in as many hours a day as he chooses to perfect his abilities. I can work on roles to a certain extent, and I can work on monologues, but in the area of human behavior, its discovery and enlargement, I usually have to wait for a part and rehearsals with my fellow actors. This always frustrated me as an actress, and so I began to devise exercises for myself to tackle a variety of technical problems that continued to bother me. Now, I present these 10 object exercises to you. Let us take the problem of trying to find and recreate 2 ordinary minutes out of life when alone. 2 minutes when I say, I wasn't doing anything. Impossible. When nothing happened. To say this is akin to saying that nothing happens in Chekhov, to which I have heard the retort, nothing does happen except that one world comes to an end and another begins. What are the components of 2 consecutive minutes of my life? Not in crisis, but in the pursuit of a simple need. What do I have to know if I want to recreate those 2 minutes of existence? Who am I? Character. What time is it? Century, year, season, day, minute. Where am I? Country, city, neighborhood, house, room, area of room. What surrounds me? Animate and inanimate objects. What are the given circumstances? Past, present, future, and the events. What is my relationship? Relation to total events, other characters, and to things. What do I want? Character, main and immediate objectives. What's in my way? Obstacles. What do I do to get what I want? The action, physical, verbal. These are the questions we must ask ourselves and explore and define in order to act. For the time being, I would like to free you from the interpretive problems of a given play and character and ask you to apply these questions to a simple exercise of finding and recreating 2 minutes out of your own life when you were alone. Example: I am sitting at this typewriter writing this chapter. Who am I? I have a strong, still too narrow, sense of identity and self-image formed by my parents, my origins, education, sociological influences, loved ones, and enemies, all the things a human being is conscious of. What time is it? 10 a.m. on September 12th, 1972. We're in the middle of presidential campaigns. Vietnam bombing raids are on the morning news. The air is very still. The light from outside has a slightly hazy glare. I'm sitting in a sunsuit because it is quite warm. Where am I? My house in Montauk. I am working at the white formica table in the dining area off the living room. The kitchen is to my left. Through the window to my right, I can see the sun deck, and beyond it, the grassy dunes, topped by the shell of a World War II lookout tower, long abandoned. Behind me, the sun is pouring through the living room. What surrounds me? The typewriter is new. Houseplants, which I recently watered, are in the corner. The white tabletop reflects brightly. In the kitchen, a fly is buzzing over the newly washed breakfast dishes. My poisonous cigarettes are at my elbow, and the ashtray needs emptying. My poodles bark at a passing car. My notes lie piled up in disorder behind the typewriter. What are the given circumstances? My collaborator on this book is expected. We have been working all summer. I've been procrastinating since 7 a.m. by cooking, cleaning, arranging flowers, watering the grass, arranging unanswered mail, and all my notes on the object exercises. My book is years in the making. A deadline is coming up. What is my relationship to the book? It represents the expression of my work, both as a teacher and as an actress. To Haskel, he's my collaborator, and also my house guest, during the writing of this book. What do I want? To be of service, to be a participant in society, as well as to be needed by those I love, to be a part of art and nature, to live up to responsibilities. Main objective, to finish this chapter. Immediate objective, to have a few pages to show him when he arrives at noon. What's in my way? Time. He's coming in 2 hours. Weather? It's gorgeous outside. The garden? Well, the vegetables need to be weeded. I would enjoy a frothy cold drink. I'm unclear about the organization of the chapter. The onion skin paper crinkles in the typewriter. My poor typing skill and many typos. What do I do to get what I want? I type. I make typos. I race ahead. I light a cigarette after emptying the ashtray. I battle with content. I battle with order. I take a breather outdoors and sniff the clematis. I yell at the poodles. I write 10 sentences with clarity. I deserve a drink. These areas are the essentials to examine in order to define what makes this moment in my life evolve. Every one of them and many more influence and make this moment inevitable. The examples I have made in each area are minimal to finding my behavior for the moment. Some of the things are primary and deal with the conscious execution of the task, and some are secondary. In turning this examination of a few minutes of your life alone into a practical exercise, I ask you not only to test all aspects mentioned above, but to pinpoint all of the physical and psychological sensations inherent in them, and then to make a layout of the action for the 2 minutes you have examined. Then, see if you can recreate them as if for the first time. I've given an example of something I was doing now at this moment of writing. I could take a remembered event from last year, or season, or week. I might select the same objective to finish a chapter, and put it at a different time, March 11th, 2 years before, in Greenwich Village on a raw, sleety day, and knocking radiators in an untidy apartment. The garbage men are on strike. I might have a head cold, be wearing an old bathrobe and terry cloth scuffs, a marred leather-top desk, my 20-year-old Remington typewriter, hot tea at my elbow, some Vicks cough drops and Kleenex, the telephone ringing incessantly, unwanted company coming for dinner at night, etc. And I will discover different behavior and actions. Object exercises should not be improvisations, although a degree of the rehearsal process will obviously involve them. But the final work should be exactly like that on a scene or a play. And you should be able to repeat a precisely defined concept broken down into actable elements, comparable to the score of a musician, as if it were happening for the first time. The only difference between the exercise and a scene is that you will be using yourself instead of a character, and your life experience instead of a play. The addition of the play requires that you find yourself in a character, using the auditory and visual concept of the playwright, director, and designer. You will work on these exercises by yourself under circumstances when you find yourself alone. This will also help you to develop discipline, which most actors are so sadly lacking. The discipline to work and to explore all by yourself. No partner to tell you, let's get down to work. Step 2 will be the testing of your exercise in communication with your teacher and peers. The final work, when you apply the problems of any exercise to a play, will of course include the powerful recognition not only of the writer, but of the other actors. When you first work on the exercises, you will probably balk. For all of the reasons I mentioned in dealing with identity, you will think you are boring and you would rather look for eccentric circumstances or interesting events. Remember the cat. Don't become bad playwrights. What should compel you into actions are definite needs, not show-off inventions. Don't look for melodrama or eccentric tales, no eviction notices, suicide notes, or tragic love affairs. An actor once brought in an exercise in which he prayed to God in a cathedral, ran behind the curtain, fired several shots, staggered back on stage, and died in front of the Madonna. Don't look for a B-movie story, but a discovery of your behavior under simple circumstances when fulfilling a precise need. To convince a group of your colleagues that you are alive with forward-moving action for 2 minutes, that this never happened before in spite of the preciseness and detail of your selections, is what you should aim for. If you can convincingly create 2 minutes on stage in which you exist as if you were alone at home, you will have succeeded.
What do I do if I have to balance? Suddenly I'm hot and in a hurry and it's dark, and how do I incorporate all these conditioning forces into my work? So I began working at home by myself. And the first thing I learned was how little we are trained to observe ourselves, our behavior. We can always tell somebody how we feel about something, but what we did when we felt a certain way, we're unable to describe. So I started to watch myself at home in a variety of circumstances, and then see if I could bring into being and recreate just 2 minutes of a simple task while I was at home, understanding everything that was the cause of my behavior. The very first exercise, it's called destination. What is my physical destination? When you are spaceless, when you don't know where you are, what surrounds you, where you came from, and where you are heading, your body will tense, you will get very self-conscious, and start to arrange yourselves. If you know where you're going, where you came from, what surrounds you, and how that influences your behavior, you get free. Then all the wonderful work, psychological work you do on character and on the movement of the scene can take place, otherwise it can't. In the future, when you work on, if you plan to work on these exercises at all, wherever you find that you snort, use an expletive, sigh, cuss, or talk, do it. These are not silent exercises. When you start to see where those things come from and how much we do talk to ourselves alone, you're a mile ahead when you get to monologues.